Let's take a deep breath, relax, and slowly explore the story of bridges. Somewhere in the deep past, long before the first city was imagined or the first field was plowed, a tree fell across a stream. Perhaps a storm toppled it. Perhaps the roots, weakened by centuries of slow erosion, simply gave way. The trunk came to rest on both banks, forming an accidental pathway over water that had, until that moment, been an obstacle no one could cross. And then someone, some unnamed and unremembered ancestor of ours, stepped onto that fallen trunk and walked across to the other side. Can you picture that moment for a second? On the far bank there might have been fruit trees, or a herd of animals that had never learned to fear human hunters. That single crossing changed everything, because it transformed the landscape from a prison into a puzzle that could be solved. And once early humans understood that crossing water was possible, they began to do it on purpose. The earliest bridges were not built at all. They were found objects, nothing more. Fallen logs, flat stones worn smooth by ancient rivers, vines draped between branches over a narrow gorge. For thousands upon thousands of years, early humans simply used whatever nature provided. In parts of what is now the American Southwest, natural stone arches span canyons where people crossed for countless generations. In the jungles of Southeast Asia, tangled root systems of enormous trees created pathways across streams without any human effort whatsoever. Even today, in the forests of Borneo, local communities make use of natural log crossings that look very much like what our earliest ancestors would have known. But at some point, the shift happened. Instead of waiting for nature to provide a crossing, people began to create them. The earliest deliberately built bridges were almost certainly simple log bridges, a tree felled across a stream, or several logs tied together with plant fibers. These left no trace for us to find because wood rots, ropes dissolve, and rivers reshape their banks over the centuries. We know they must have existed because every bridge-building culture on Earth independently came up with this same basic idea. From the river valleys of South America to the highlands of New Guinea, from the forests of Scandinavia to the mountains of the Andes, peoples who had never met one another all arrived at the same quiet solution: put something across the gap and walk over it. The oldest physical evidence of deliberate bridge construction takes us to the wetlands of ancient Europe. In Switzerland, beneath the waters of Lake Zurich, archaeologists have found the remains of timber posts that once supported a wooden bridge, dating back to roughly 1500 years before the Common Era. The communities who lived in stilt houses along the Alpine lakes were builders of timber causeways and bridges, and similar discoveries across the lakes of Switzerland, Austria, and northern Italy suggest a network of water crossings that, 3,500 years ago, already connected communities in ways the surrounding mountains made difficult on dry land. Further south, in the sunburned hills of Greece, something rather remarkable still survives. Near the modern road from the ancient city of Tiryns to the town of Epidaurus, there stands a small stone bridge that was built more than 3,000 years ago during the age of the Mycenaean kings. It is still in use today. Cars drive over the same stone that Bronze Age chariots once crossed. The bridge is about 22 meters long, just over 5.5 meters wide, and it spans a small stream using a corbelled arch, massive limestone blocks stacked inward from each side until they meet at the top, held in place by nothing but the weight of the stones pressing against one another. The people who built that bridge did not use any kind of cement or binding material. They fitted enormous, roughly shaped stones together through patience and skill, wedging smaller stones into the gaps. The result looks almost simple, but it is deeply clever. The wide base and inward sloping walls create such stable balance that the bridge has outlasted not just the civilization that built it, but dozens of civilizations that followed. And this bridge was not alone. It was one of 4 similar bridges in the area, all part of a military road connecting the fortress of Tiryns to the town of Epidaurus. The road was wide enough for chariots, and the bridges were strong enough to bear their weight. This was not improvised river crossing. This was planned infrastructure built to serve a kingdom. And it tells us something important, that the connection between bridges and power is as old as bridge building itself. Whoever controlled the crossings controlled the movement of armies, goods, and knowledge. Meanwhile, in what is now Iraq, even older bridges were being built. At the ancient city of Gursu in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the remains of a bridge dating back roughly 4,000 years still exist. The people of that region faced the fundamental challenge of every river civilization, how to cross the waters that both fed them and divided them. Their solutions, built from brick and a natural tar that seeped from the earth, laid the groundwork for the great bridges that would follow. There is a pattern in all of this that will repeat throughout our story. The bridges we can still see and touch represent only the tiniest fraction of the bridges that were ever built. For every stone bridge that endures across the centuries, there were thousands of log crossings, vine bridges, and simple stone fords that served their communities for generations before vanishing as completely as the people who built them. But the idea did not vanish. The concept of the bridge, a structure that allows passage across an obstacle, is one of the most fundamental ideas in all of human experience. It is older than writing, older than farming, older than the wheel. It may even be older than spoken language itself, born in that silent moment when a distant ancestor watched a tree fall across a stream and understood, in some deep and wordless way, what it meant. And from that quiet beginning, an extraordinary story unfolds. Over thousands of years, the simple act of crossing water would inspire some of the greatest building projects in human history. It would reshape whole economies, redirect wars, and transform the landscapes of entire continents. And so, let us follow that story now, across the rivers and valleys and gorges of the ancient world, and see where it takes us. In the 6th century before the Common Era, the Greek historian Herodotus visited the great city of Babylon and described a sight that left him astonished. Spanning the wide Euphrates River, which divided the city into its eastern and western halves, was a massive bridge built on stone supports with wooden planks laid across the top. The planks, Herodotus noted with some amusement, were removed every night to prevent thieves from crossing between the two sides of the city. It is a detail that tells us something about ancient urban life, the cleverness and the worry of it, all wrapped up in a single bridge. This bridge was built during the reign of a king named Nebuchadnezzar II, sometime in the 6th century before the Common Era, and it was one of the most ambitious building projects of the ancient world. Babylon was a city shaped entirely by water. The Euphrates flowed directly through its center, and the city's builders had to work around that reality every single day. They lined the river with massive walls coated in a natural tar that seeped from the earth in that region, a kind of waterproofing that they had perfected over centuries of building in a landscape where floods were always a danger. The bridge supports were shaped like the front of a boat with pointed ends facing upstream. This was not decoration. The pointed shape pushed the river's current aside and reduced the scouring that could wash away the foundations. It was a quiet piece of engineering brilliance, and it is worth pausing on because Roman bridge builders would independently discover the same trick centuries later on a different river in a different part of the world. The bridge in Babylon fed directly into the city's most famous street, the grand avenue that ran from the Great Gate decorated with blue tiles all the way through the heart of the city. During the New Year celebrations, sacred processions carrying statues of the gods would have crossed this bridge, making it not just a piece of everyday infrastructure, but a stage for religious ceremony. The bridge carried daily traffic, yes, but it also carried the weight of Babylonian faith and royal authority. Now, let us travel to a very different river. In Egypt, the challenge was the Nile itself, a river so vast and so central to Egyptian life that it shaped everything about the civilization. The Egyptians did not build many permanent bridges across the Nile, partly because the river was simply too wide for the tools they had, and partly because the Nile served more as a highway than a barrier. Egyptian engineers instead built floating bridges, temporary crossings made from boats or rafts lashed together and anchored in the riverbed. These could be put together when needed and taken apart when they were not, which was a practical solution in a land where the annual flooding would have washed away anything permanent. But the Egyptians showed their real bridge-building talent in a different way. The long causeways that connected the Nile Valley to the Great Pyramid complexes were, in a sense, bridges over floodplains. The causeway leading to the Great Pyramid, built more than 4,500 years ago, stretched roughly half a mile from the edge of the flood zone up to the Pyramid Plateau. It was an enclosed roofed corridor of limestone blocks designed to carry the vast quantities of building stone needed for pyramid construction. These causeways had to survive the annual flood, and their massive construction allowed them to do so for thousands of years. Further east, along the Indus River in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, another great civilization was building its cities with a care for planning and order that still impresses engineers today. The cities of the Indus Valley had grid-patterned streets, advanced drainage, and standardized brick construction. While no bridges from this civilization have been conclusively identified, the sophistication of their water management suggests they were certainly capable of building them. At one of their port cities, a dockyard connected to an inland canal system would have required some form of crossing to function at all. But of all the ancient river civilizations, it was perhaps Persia that best understood the strategic power of bridges. The great empire of the Persians, which at its height stretched from Egypt to India, depended on a vast road network that connected its far-flung provinces. Bridges were the essential links in this chain, and when King Xerxes decided to invade Greece around 480 years before the Common Era, he ordered the construction of 2 floating bridges across the narrow strait that separates Asia from Europe. When a storm destroyed the first pair of bridges, Xerxes, so the story goes, was so furious that he ordered the sea itself to be punished, the waters whipped and branded with hot irons. Then he had the bridges rebuilt. The second attempt succeeded, with more than 600 boats lashed together to form a crossing wide enough for an army to march across. Herodotus tells us that it took 7 days and 7 nights for the entire army to cross, a staggering feat that shows just how enormous ancient military operations could be. Those floating bridges were temporary, never meant to last. But they proved something important, that bridges were instruments of power. The ability to cross a body of water that your enemy could not cross gave you an advantage that could decide wars. This was a lesson that would echo through military history for the next 2,500 years. The ancient river civilizations built bridges because they had no choice. The rivers that watered their crops and powered their trade also divided their lands and slowed their armies. The solutions they found, stone supports in Babylon, floating bridges in Egypt, boat crossings in Persia, established the basic ideas of bridge engineering that every civilization since has inherited. And yet, for all their ingenuity, these builders were working within limits. They could span rivers, but not great distances. They could build for foot traffic and animal carts, but not for the loads that later ages would demand. The truly revolutionary leap in bridge engineering, the development of the true arch, would come from a civilization just beginning to grow on the banks of a river called the Tiber, in a small settlement that would one day be called Rome. In the year 605, during a brief but transformative period in Chinese history, a craftsman named Li Chun completed work on a bridge that would stand for more than 1,400 years. The bridge spans a small river in Hebei province, and it remains one of the most quietly remarkable pieces of engineering ever produced by human hands. When Li Chun finished his work, Europe was deep in what is sometimes called the Dark Ages. The Roman Empire had been gone for more than a century, and it would be another 700 years before European engineers matched what this single Chinese builder had achieved. What made this bridge so special was its shape. Every stone arch bridge built before it, in Rome, in Persia, in the lands between the great rivers, had used a half-circle arch, a full semicircle of stone rising from the riverbank. The half-circle arch was strong and stable, but it had a serious drawback. It required steep ramps on either side to climb up and over the high point of the arch. For a bridge spanning a wide river, this meant either an impossibly tall arch or painfully steep approaches that would exhaust anyone trying to cross. Li Chun's answer was both elegant and bold. He flattened the arch, creating a shallow curve that rose only a fraction of the distance across the span. The bridge rises only about 1/5 as high as it is wide, which meant that the roadway across the top was nearly level. Carts, horses, and people could cross without climbing a steep hill on either side. It was a departure from everything that had come before, and it changed bridge building forever. But Li Chun was not finished. At each end of the main arch, he cut 2 smaller openings through the solid stone above the curve, the area that in other bridges would have been filled with heavy masonry. These openings were the first of their kind anywhere in the world. They did 3 things at once. They reduced the weight of the bridge by roughly 15%. They allowed floodwaters to pass through the structure rather than slamming against it, and they gave the bridge a visual lightness and grace that made it look almost as though it were floating above the river. The bridge spans 37 meters. It has survived at least 10 major floods, 8 wars, and numerous earthquakes, including a devastating quake in 1966. It did all of this 700 years before any European engineer attempted a similar design. Can you imagine that for a moment? A bridge built while medieval Europe was just beginning to stir, still standing, still carrying weight, still graceful after all those centuries. Now, this bridge was not the beginning of China's love affair with bridge building. It was, in many ways, the high point of a tradition stretching back thousands of years. China's geography made bridges not merely useful, but absolutely essential. Southern China in particular is a landscape of rivers, gorges, and mountains where 2 villages might be separated by a single valley that could take days to walk around. The need for crossings was urgent, and the response was an extraordinary variety of bridge types. During a later period of Chinese history, known as the Song Dynasty, engineers in the coastal province of Fujian built a long stone bridge with dozens of openings between stone supports. What makes this bridge worth pausing on is the method they used to strengthen the foundations. The builders deliberately encouraged oysters to grow on the base stones. The oyster shells grew into a natural bonding material, cementing the stones together with a strength that no human-made mixture could match. This was remarkably the first known use of a living organism in bridge construction anywhere in the world. China also pioneered the use of iron chains to build suspension bridges. In the mountains of Sichuan province, where gorges plunge hundreds of meters to roaring rivers below, engineers forged massive iron chains, stretched them across the void, and laid wooden planks across them to form walkways. Crossing one of these bridges must have been a terrifying experience. The chains swayed in the wind, the planks creaked and shifted underfoot, and the gorge below dropped away into mist. Yet for the communities on either side, these bridges were lifelines, the only connection between villages that the mountains would otherwise have kept apart forever. The 4 most famous bridges of ancient China each represent a completely different approach to the same problem. One used the flattened arch. Another used long stone beams across many supports. A third combined fixed stone arches with a floating section in the middle that could be opened to let boats pass, a design found nowhere else on Earth. And the fourth, which the Venetian traveler Marco Polo described in the 13th century as the finest bridge in the world, carried travelers across a river near the capital on graceful stone arches lined with carved lions. What connects all of China's bridge-building history is a willingness to experiment and a practical genius for working with whatever materials were at hand. Where stone was plentiful, Chinese engineers built stone bridges of extraordinary skill. Where iron was available, they forged chain bridges. Where neither could be found, they built cantilevered timber bridges, extending horizontal beams further and further over the void until they met in the middle. And in the wetlands and rice fields of the south, they built countless small bridges, so many that some regions earned the nickname the Land of 10,000 Bridges. For a long time, Western histories of engineering barely mentioned China, focusing instead on the Roman arch as the great foundational achievement. But as scholars have looked more carefully at the evidence, the picture has changed dramatically. The flattened arch, the open spandrel, the iron chain suspension bridge, the use of living organisms in foundations, all of these were Chinese innovations, many of them predating their European equivalents by hundreds of years. Li Chun's bridge still stands in Hebei province, carrying traffic across the same river it has spanned for 14 centuries. It has been repaired and restored over the years, but its fundamental shape, that graceful, shallow arch, those open spandrels, remains Li Chun's original design. And it reminds us that the history of engineering is not a straight line from Rome to the modern West, but a rich and tangled web of invention stretching across every continent and every civilization. Let us turn now to the civilization that is most often credited with perfecting the arch, the one that built an empire on it, and see what the Romans made of the simple idea of crossing a river. In the summer of 55 years before the Common Era, Julius Caesar stood on the western bank of the Rhine River and faced a problem that was as much about politics as it was about engineering. The tribes on the far side of the river had been raiding the lands that Rome claimed to control, and Caesar needed to show them that no river could protect them from Roman power. He could have crossed by boat, as any general might have done, but Caesar wanted to make a statement. He ordered his soldiers to build a bridge. What happened next astonished the ancient world. In just 10 days, Caesar's engineers drove wooden posts into the Rhine's riverbed, fixed crossbeams to create sturdy frames, and laid a road surface across the top. The bridge was wide enough for troops, horses, and supply wagons to cross at the same time. Caesar marched his army across, spent 18 days on the far side in a show of force, then marched back and had the whole thing torn down. The message was permanent even if the bridge was not. Rome could cross any river, anywhere, whenever it chose. There was no hiding from Roman reach. The Romans did not invent the arch. That honor probably belongs to builders in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, or perhaps to the Etruscans who lived in Italy before Rome rose to power. But the Romans took the arch and perfected it. They turned the simple semicircle of stone into the foundation of a road network that stretched from the cold hills of Scotland to the deserts of Syria. The key to their success was a material we might call ancient concrete. Roman engineers discovered that by mixing a particular kind of volcanic ash with lime and water, they could create a substance that set harder than stone and could be shaped into almost any form. This mixture could even harden underwater, which made it perfect for building bridge foundations in riverbeds. Combined with the semicircular arch, which spreads weight evenly along its curve, this material allowed the Romans to build bridges that were stronger, larger, and more lasting than anything the world had seen. The oldest Roman stone bridge still standing in Rome itself was begun about 179 years before the Common Era, though only a single arch of it survives today, earning it the affectionate nickname the Broken Bridge. But the oldest, fully intact Roman bridge still in use is a different one entirely, built in 62 years before the Common Era to connect the eastern bank of the Tiber River to a small island in midstream. Every day, people in Rome walk across the same arches that their ancestors walked across more than 2,000 years ago. It is a quietly staggering fact. But perhaps the most spectacular Roman bridge was not built for people at all. In what is now southern France, the Romans built a structure designed to carry water across a wide valley on its way to the city of Nimes. It stands almost 50 meters tall at its highest point, stretches nearly 270 meters across the valley, and consists of 3 layers of arches stacked one on top of the other. The stones, some weighing as much as 6 tons, were cut with such precision that they fit together without any binding material at all, held in place by nothing but gravity and the perfection of their shaping. This structure has stood for more than 2,000 years, and it remains one of the most photographed places on Earth. The Romans built bridges not only because they were useful, but because they were declarations of authority. When Roman engineers arrived in a conquered land and built a bridge that would outlast the memory of anyone who had resisted them, the meaning was clear. Roman civilization was here to stay. In western Spain, a bridge was built on the orders of the Emperor Trajan, and its architect left behind an inscription that still makes you pause when you read it. He wrote with quiet confidence that he was leaving a bridge forever to the generations of the world. That bridge, built of massive stone blocks without any binding material, rises more than 70 meters above the river below. It has suffered more damage from wars than from weather, its arches blown apart and rebuilt during various conflicts over the centuries. But its basic structure, those massive Roman arches, endures. Across the empire, Roman engineers built over 900 bridges, and many of them survive in some form to this day. In Italy, Spain, Turkey, North Africa, and Syria, fragments of Roman bridges rise from riverbeds that have shifted course over the centuries, the roads they once served long since buried under farmland and forest. The Romans also developed a clever technique for building bridge foundations in water. They would construct a watertight enclosure of wooden posts in the riverbed, pump out the water using bucket chains, and then dig down to solid rock on which to lay the foundation stones. This method, described in detail by a Roman architect writing around 15 years before the Common Era, remained the standard way of building bridge foundations for nearly 2,000 years. The Roman approach to bridges was inseparable from the Roman approach to empire. The famous Roman roads, those long straight highways that connected the capital to every corner of the territory, needed bridges at every river crossing. And the quality of construction was remarkably consistent. A bridge built in Spain looked much like one built in Syria because Roman engineers followed standardized designs and worked within a professional organization that passed knowledge down across centuries and continents. When the Roman Empire in the West fell in 476, the knowledge that had built all those bridges did not vanish overnight, but it did fade. The centralized government that had paid for and organized bridge construction dissolved. The professional engineers who had maintained standards went their separate ways. Europe entered a long period in which the bridges the Romans had built continued to serve. Many of them are still serving today, but new bridges of comparable ambition would not be built for hundreds of years. The people of medieval Europe crossed the same Roman bridges their grandparents had crossed, looked up at the same arches and wondered how such things had ever been made. The Roman arch did not disappear entirely. It found its way into churches and cathedrals and eventually back into bridges when medieval Europe slowly rediscovered the engineering that had once made Rome master of the world. But that rediscovery was still a long way off, and before we arrive there, let us travel to a very different part of the world where bridges were being built not from stone and mortar, but from woven grass. Every June, on the second Sunday of the month, 4 communities gather at a gorge high above a rushing river in the southern Peruvian Andes. They come together for a ritual that has been performed continuously for more than 500 years and whose roots reach back much further than that. Over the course of 3 days, these communities will take apart and rebuild a bridge made entirely of woven grass, the last surviving rope bridge of the Inca Empire, and one of the most extraordinary feats of communal engineering on Earth. The process begins months before the bridge building itself. Families in the surrounding villages harvest a hardy grass that grows in the high, humid meadows of the mountains. The grass is dried, then braided into thin cords, which are twisted together into thicker ropes, which are combined into massive cables. Everyone participates, men, women, and children, because the bridge belongs to the whole community. When the cables are ready, the old bridge is cut away and allowed to fall into the gorge. Then the new cables are stretched across the void, anchored to stone supports on either side, and woven together into a walkway suspended over the churning water far below. The result is a bridge made entirely of grass. It sways in the wind. It creaks under the weight of a person walking across it. Looking down through the woven floor, you can see the river moving far below, and yet it works. It has worked for centuries. This bridge was recognized by an international heritage organization in 2013, not primarily as an engineering achievement, though it certainly is one, but as a living tradition that holds together the social and spiritual life of the communities that maintain it. This last surviving rope bridge is the sole remnant of what was once a vast network spanning the Andes. The Inca Empire, which at its peak in the early 1500s controlled more than 10 million people across a territory stretching from modern Colombia to Chile, was connected by a great road network of roughly 40,000 kilometers. Imagine that distance for a moment. Crossing the deep gorges and violent rivers of the Andes required hundreds of suspension bridges, all built from woven grass and maintained through a system of communal labor. Every bridge was the responsibility of a specific community, which was required to rebuild it regularly as part of its contribution to the empire. When the Spanish arrived in the 1530s, they were astonished by what they found. They were accustomed to stone and timber bridges, and the idea of a bridge made from braided grass, strong enough to bear the weight of men and loaded pack animals, was completely foreign to them. Several early Spanish writers described these bridges with a mixture of admiration and fear, noting that crossing them required real courage, as the bridges swayed in the mountain winds and the gaps in the woven floor offered terrifying views of the abyss below. The Spanish quickly understood the military importance of these bridges. Controlling the bridges meant controlling movement through the Andes, and the deliberate destruction of bridges became a weapon for both sides. Inca commanders cut bridges to trap Spanish forces in vulnerable positions, while the Spanish systematically destroyed bridges to prevent communication between groups of resistance fighters. After the conquest was complete, the Spanish maintained some of the bridges but allowed most to fall apart, replacing them with European-style stone and timber structures where they were needed. Beyond the Inca heartland, other bridge-building traditions flourished across the Americas. The Maya civilization, which thrived in what is now Mexico, Guatemala, and neighboring lands, built elaborate raised causeways that connected cities across the flat, swampy landscape of the Yucatan Peninsula. These causeways, built from crushed limestone covered with smooth plaster, served as elevated bridges over terrain that flooded with the seasons. Some stretched for enormous distances. One causeway connecting two Maya cities runs for approximately 100 kilometers, making it one of the longest road structures in the ancient Americas. In North America, the peoples of the Pacific Northwest built cantilevered timber bridges across the salmon-rich rivers of what is now British Columbia. On the Great Plains, where rivers were wide but shallow, people used fords and seasonal ice bridges. In the eastern woodlands, log bridges and vine bridges crossed the rivers of the dense forest. These bridges left almost no trace for archaeologists to find, but early European explorers described established crossing points at major rivers, complete with maintained approaches and cleared banks, evidence of engineering traditions that were old long before any European arrived. The bridge-building traditions of the Americas remind us that engineering skill is not the property of any single continent or civilization. The Inca rope bridge represents a fundamentally different approach to crossing a gap than the Roman stone arch, but it is no less clever. The Inca engineers understood, in their own way, the principle that a material can resist being pulled apart, that grass, when braided and twisted in great enough quantity, can support loads that would snap a single strand. They understood that a bridge hanging from cables anchored at either end could span distances that a rigid beam or arch could never reach. And they understood that a bridge was not just a structure but a social bond, maintained through shared work and woven into the fabric of community life. That last surviving rope bridge, rebuilt every year in a ceremony that takes only 3 days, but is prepared for all year long, embodies this understanding perfectly. When the 4 communities gather at the gorge each June, they are not merely building a bridge. They are renewing their ties to each other, to the landscape, and to the ancestors who first taught them how to weave grass into a lifeline across the void. It is a 500-year-old act of remembering, a refusal to let go of the knowledge that the past has given them. And so, having crossed the mountains of the Americas, let us now travel to a very different kind of bridge, one that is not built at all, but grown. Deep in the cloud forests of a region called Meghalaya in the remote northeastern corner of India, a bridge is growing. Not being built, but growing. Somewhere in the misty valleys below the plateau, the dangling roots of a rubber fig tree are being gently guided across a stream by the hands of a village elder, tied to bamboo scaffolding that will hold them in place as they reach toward the opposite bank. In 20 years, perhaps 25, those roots will have thickened, intertwined, and fused into a living bridge strong enough to bear the weight of 50 people at once. And here is the lovely part. The bridge will not weaken with age. It will grow stronger, its root structure thickening and tightening over the decades, potentially lasting for centuries. The living root bridges of Meghalaya are among the most extraordinary engineering achievements in the history of any civilization, and they are produced not by concrete and steel, but by patience and an intimate knowledge of the natural world. The people who create them, the Khasi and Jaintia communities of this region, have been doing so for at least 500 years, though the tradition may be much older. There are more than 70 known living root bridges in the area, and some of them are astonishing double-decker structures where a second bridge grows above the first. The most famous of these, near a village reachable only by descending a steep stone staircase through the jungle, is a tangle of roots spanning a stream in 2 levels, connected by winding root staircases, a structure of almost dreamlike beauty. These bridges exist because of the unique conditions of their homeland. The name Meghalaya means abode of clouds, and the region is one of the wettest places on Earth, receiving more than 11 meters of rainfall each year in some locations. In this saturated landscape, ordinary bridges face terrible challenges. Wooden bridges rot within a few years. Steel rusts away in the damp. Concrete cracks and crumbles. The steep terrain, prone to landslides during the months of heavy rain, makes the construction of modern roads and bridges extraordinarily difficult. The living root bridges, by contrast, thrive in exactly these conditions. The rubber fig tree flourishes in the wet climate, and its dangling roots, once established, only grow stronger with time and moisture. In the spiritual traditions of the Khasi people, these bridges carry deep meaning. According to their stories, the ancestors of the people descended from heaven to earth on a golden bridge made of living roots. The bridges they grow today are a continuation of that story, a connection between the human world and the natural one. The bridges have been nominated for international heritage recognition, celebrated as a unique combination of engineering, ecology, and cultural tradition found nowhere else on Earth. Let us widen our view now across the broader landscapes of South and Southeast Asia. The great empire of the Khmer, which dominated much of mainland Southeast Asia from roughly the 9th to the 15th century, built bridges on a grand scale. Their road network, constructed between the 11th and 13th centuries, connected the capital at Angkor to the far reaches of the empire through more than 1,000 kilometers of raised roads. These roads crossed more than 100 bridges built from stone, some of them stretching well over 100 meters in length. The temple complex of Angkor Wat itself features a remarkable bridge, a causeway nearly 200 meters long crossing the great moat that surrounds the temple. This bridge, lined with carved stone railings depicting mythical serpents, was not merely a crossing but a symbolic passage from the everyday world into the sacred space of the temple. In Khmer belief, the moat represented the cosmic ocean, and the bridge was the pathway connecting the earthly realm to the divine. It is a theme we will encounter again and again in the story of bridges. The idea that crossing from one side to the other is not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one. Beyond the great empires, the everyday bridge-building traditions of Southeast Asia deserve a moment of our attention. Across the countries of this warm, river-rich region, communities have built bridges from bamboo for centuries. Bamboo is a wonderful material for bridges in tropical climates. It grows rapidly, it is remarkably strong for its weight, and it is available in abundance. Bamboo bridges are typically rebuilt every year after the season of heavy rains, when flooding destroys the previous year's structure. This cycle of destruction and renewal is accepted as a natural rhythm of life, a philosophy of impermanence that is quite different from the Western desire to build bridges that last forever. In India, the bridge-building tradition covers an enormous range of structures reflecting the diversity of the land itself. From ancient stone bridges in the south to the rope bridges of the high mountain regions in the north, India's bridge history spans at least 2,000 years. The rope bridges of the great mountain ranges, built from twisted fibers and spanning terrifying gorges, are closely related in principle to the Inca rope bridges of the Andes, though they developed entirely independently on the other side of the world. That two civilizations with no contact whatsoever arrived at the same solution, woven fibers strung across a void, is one of the most striking examples of universal human engineering instinct. The bridges of South and Southeast Asia remind us that innovation takes many forms. The living root bridges of Meghalaya are as ingenious as any steel suspension bridge. The stone roads of the Khmer Empire were as sophisticated as any Roman highway. These traditions developed largely on their own, drawing on local knowledge, local materials, and local needs. They are alternative histories of bridge building, paths not taken by the Western tradition, but no less worthy of our quiet admiration. And now, let us leave the physical world of bridges for a moment and enter the world of story and symbol. Because across nearly every culture and every religion, the bridge has carried a meaning far deeper than simple engineering. Let us explore the bridges of myth. On the day the world ends, according to the ancient Norse poets, the gods will ride out across a burning rainbow to meet their doom. The bridge they cross is a shimmering pathway of fire, water, and air that connects the world of mortals to the realm of the gods. It has 3 colors, possesses great strength, and is built, the old stories tell us, with more art and skill than any other construction. It is guarded by a watchful god who stands at its foot with a great horn, waiting for the approach of the enemies who will one day storm across and bring about the twilight of the gods. When that day comes, the invaders will ride across in such numbers that the bridge itself will shatter and the world as it is known will come to an end. This is the most famous mythological bridge in Western culture, but it is far from the only one. Across nearly every civilization and religious tradition, bridges carry a deep symbolic weight that goes far beyond their practical use. They are structures that exist between places, between one state of being and the next. In mythology, they almost always represent the passage between life and death, between the mortal and the divine, between the world we can see and the world we cannot. In one of the world's oldest religious traditions, the faith that arose in ancient Persia, the bridge plays a central role in the journey of the soul after death. Every soul, the faithful believe, must cross a great bridge that spans the abyss between the world of the living and the afterlife. For the righteous, the bridge is wide and easy to cross, and the soul is greeted by a beautiful guide who leads it into a place of happiness. For the wicked, the bridge narrows to the width of a razor's edge, and the soul falls into darkness below. The bridge is guarded by watchful beings, and the crossing is witnessed by divine judges who weigh the soul's deeds in life. Can you feel the power of that image? A bridge so narrow that only the good can cross it. It is an idea that appears in one form or another in religious traditions around the world. In the faith of Islam, a similar bridge appears in the descriptions of the Day of Judgment. This bridge is stretched over the fires below, thinner than a hair and sharper than a sword. Every soul must cross it. The righteous will cross swiftly, some as fast as a flash of light, while those who have done wrong will stumble and fall into the flames. The image is vivid and powerful, one of the most striking in the tradition's descriptions of what comes after death. In the Buddhist tradition, the idea of the bridge appears more as a gentle metaphor. One of the central concepts of the faith is described by a word that means crossing to the other shore. The practices of generosity, patience, effort, and wisdom are the means by which a person crosses from the shore of suffering to the shore of understanding. The bridge in this tradition is not a physical structure but a way of living, and yet the image is unmistakable. Life is a river, and peace lies on the far bank, and the path between them is a bridge that must be walked with care and compassion. In the spiritual traditions of Japan, sacred bridges are found at the entrances to holy places, marking the boundary between the ordinary world and the sacred space beyond. Crossing the bridge is an act of leaving behind the everyday before entering the presence of the spirits of nature and ancestors. The most famous of these bridges, a graceful arch of red-painted wood spanning a river at the approach to a mountainside shrine, was said in legend to have been created by a holy man who summoned two serpents to form a crossing so he could reach the sacred mountain on the other side. Chinese tradition gives us one of the most romantic bridge stories in all of world mythology. According to the legend, two lovers were separated by the goddess of heaven, who placed them on opposite sides of the great river of stars, what we know as the Milky Way. Once a year, on the 7th day of the 7th month, all the magpies in the world fly up to heaven and form a bridge of their bodies across that river of stars, allowing the lovers to reunite for a single night. The festival celebrating this reunion is still observed across East Asia, a celebration of love kept alive by a bridge made of wings. Perhaps the most consequential bridge in religious history, however, is not a physical bridge at all, but a word. In ancient Rome, the chief priest of the state religion bore a title that is commonly translated as greatest bridge builder. The title combined the word for bridge with the word for maker. The priest was the one who built the bridge between humanity and the gods, maintaining peace with the divine through proper ceremony and respect. And here is where the story takes a quiet turn that stretches all the way to the present day. When the Roman Empire became Christian, that priestly title was eventually adopted by the head of the church in Rome. To this day, the leader of the Catholic Church carries that ancient Roman title, the one that means supreme bridge builder. Every time the word pontiff is spoken, the ancient connection between bridges and the sacred is being invoked, perhaps without anyone thinking about it. The head of one of the world's largest religions is, by his very title, a builder of the bridge between the human and the divine. This recurring connection between bridges and the sacred is not a coincidence. Bridges exist in the space between. They are neither here nor there, neither one side nor the other. They are transition, passage, the moment of crossing from one condition to another. It is no wonder that nearly every culture has found in the bridge a symbol for the most profound crossing of all, the passage from life to death, from the known to the unknown, from the mortal to the eternal. The bridge is one of the oldest metaphors for the human condition, and it endures because the experience it describes is universal. That moment of stepping out over the void, trusting that there is something solid on the other side, is something every person understands. And now, let us step back from the world of myth and return to the world of stone and mortar, to the bridges of medieval Europe, where faith and engineering were woven together in ways that we might find surprising. In 1177, a young shepherd walked down from the mountains of southern France and arrived in the city of Avignon with a message he said had come directly from God. He had heard a voice from heaven. He told the astonished citizens. The voice had instructed him to go to Avignon and tell the people that a bridge must be built. The people of Avignon laughed at him. The local bishop, doubtful of this wild-eyed youth claiming divine instruction, challenged him to prove his calling by lifting an enormous stone and throwing it into the river. According to the legend, the young man did exactly that, heaving a stone that no normal person could move and casting it into the water, aided, the old stories say, by angels bathed in golden light. Whether or not that miracle actually happened, the bridge was built. Construction began that same year and was finished in 1185, remarkably fast for the era. The bridge stretched more than 900 meters across the river on 22 stone arches, and it was the only fixed crossing between the city of Lyon and the Mediterranean Sea, giving it enormous importance for trade and travel. The young shepherd, who came to be called Saint Benezet, was buried after his death in a small chapel built right on one of the bridge's piers, where his remains stayed for nearly 5 centuries. The bridge eventually suffered the fate of so many medieval structures. Wars and floods damaged it again and again, and by 1669, a catastrophic flood destroyed most of the arches. Only 4 survive today, ending abruptly in the middle of the river, one of the most recognizable ruins in all of France. The story of Saint Benezet shows us something important about medieval bridge building in Europe. In those centuries, bridges were understood as sacred structures, acts of religious devotion as much as feats of engineering. Building a bridge was considered a charitable deed comparable to building a church or founding a hospital. Bridges served pilgrims traveling to holy sites, and many bridges had chapels built right onto them where travelers could pray for safe passage. This connection between bridge building and holiness gave rise to religious groups dedicated to constructing and maintaining bridges, communities of devoted men who saw their work as a calling from God. No medieval bridge captures the spirit of its age more completely than the Great Bridge that once crossed the Thames in London. Construction began in 1176, supervised by a London priest, and was completed 33 years later. The bridge stretched more than 900 feet across the river on 19 stone supports, each resting on an artificial island of wooden posts driven into the riverbed and filled with rubble. These islands were broad enough to narrow the river's flow, creating dangerous rapids between them. Trying to pass under the bridge in a boat was genuinely risky, and drownings were not uncommon. But what made this bridge truly unique was what grew on top of it. Within a few years of its completion, houses began to spring up along its length. By the 1300s, roughly 140 houses crowded the bridge, some rising 7 stories high and jutting out over the water by 2 meters on either side. The roadway threaded beneath a series of tunnels formed by these overhanging buildings, creating something like a covered street, perhaps London's first shopping arcade. The ground floors were shops selling gloves, hats, knives, bows and arrows, and the bridge had a permanent population of about 500 people, sometimes rising to as many as 800. Can you picture that for a moment? A whole neighborhood perched above a river with shops and homes and a chapel at its center, all balanced on stone arches hundreds of years old. The chapel, built over an enlarged support, was grander than many town churches and served as the starting point for pilgrimages to a famous shrine. The bridge was also infamous for a much darker tradition. The gatehouse at its southern end displayed the severed heads of those convicted of treason, mounted on poles and preserved in tar as a grim warning. This gruesome practice continued for centuries. The houses on this bridge stood for more than 550 years before being demolished in 1761. The bridge itself survived until 1831, when it was replaced. By then, it had been a center of London life for over 6 centuries, a community of its own, with its own economy and its own peculiar identity as a place that was neither land nor water, but something in between. Across Europe, other great medieval bridges were rising with similar ambition. In Prague, construction of the Charles Bridge began in 1357 under the patronage of King Charles IV. It took roughly 60 years to complete, and the architect designed 16 stone arches spanning the river over a length of more than 500 meters. An enduring legend says that the mortar was mixed with raw eggs to strengthen it, and recent testing of the material has actually found traces of egg in the mixture. Over the centuries, 30 statues of saints were added to the bridge, the most famous depicting a priest who was tortured to death for refusing to reveal the secrets of the Queen's private confession. Touching the plaque beneath his statue is said to bring good fortune, and the bronze has been worn smooth by millions of hopeful hands. Erbil bridge building was slow, expensive, and dangerous. A single bridge could take decades to finish, and finding the money was a constant struggle. Bridges were paid for through a patchwork of royal grants, church funds, private gifts, tolls, and sometimes the proceeds of spiritual pardons offered by the church. The tolls charged for crossing were a significant source of income, and they caused considerable resentment, with travelers complaining bitterly about excessive fees. The bridges themselves were among the most valuable pieces of property in a region, and control of them was a matter of fierce political competition. Whoever held the bridge held the crossing, and whoever held the crossing controlled the flow of trade. And so the medieval bridge was many things at once: a crossing, a marketplace, a chapel, a fortress, a neighborhood, and a source of tax revenue. It was sacred and it was practical, built by faith and maintained by money. And as Europe slowly emerged from the medieval period, the bridge would begin to change once more, shaped by new influences flowing in from the lands of the Islamic world. Let us turn our attention there now. On a warm evening in the city of Isfahan in present-day Iran, a bridge becomes something more than a crossing. As the sun sets behind the mountains and the light turns golden over the river, families gather on the bridge's lower level, sitting in the alcoves between its massive stone supports. Musicians play stringed instruments. Tea vendors move through the crowd with steaming glasses. The sound of conversation and laughter mixes with the murmur of water flowing through the channels below. This bridge, known as the Bridge of 33 Arches, was designed to be lived in, to be a public gathering space as much as a passage from one bank to the other. And it embodies a philosophy of bridge design that is quite different from anything we have encountered so far. This bridge was built at the turn of the 17th century, during one of the great periods of Persian civilization. It stretches nearly 300 meters across the river, and it features 2 levels of arches, 33 in the lower level and more in the upper. The bridge served 3 purposes at once: as a crossing for people and carts, as a kind of dam that helped regulate the river's flow, and as a gathering place where the people of Isfahan could come to sit, talk, and enjoy the evening air. Few bridges anywhere in the Western tradition have ever attempted to be all 3 of these things at the same time. Isfahan's other great bridge, built a few decades later, takes this idea even further. It features gates underneath that can control the water level, turning the bridge into a working piece of water management. Its upper level includes covered sitting areas where travelers and locals could rest and watch the river. The central pavilion was reportedly used by the ruler himself for viewing festivals and ceremonies on the water below. The combination of water engineering, architectural beauty, and social function makes this bridge one of the most thoughtfully designed crossing structures in the world. A place where the bridge is not just something you walk across, but somewhere you want to be. The engineering traditions of the Islamic world drew from many sources. Early Islamic builders inherited Roman techniques through the lands that had once been the eastern half of the Roman Empire. They absorbed Persian engineering knowledge from the civilizations that had come before them, and innovations from China traveled westward along the great trading routes we know as the Silk Road. The result was a blending that produced bridges of remarkable skill and beauty. In the Bosnian city of Mostar, the tradition of Ottoman bridge building produced one of the most beloved bridges in all of southeastern Europe. Completed in 1566, this bridge was designed by an architect who had studied under the greatest builder of the Ottoman age. The commission came from the Sultan himself. The architect created a single stone arch spanning nearly 29 meters over the river below, a feat of engineering so daring that legend says the builder prepared his own funeral before the temporary supports were removed, uncertain whether the arch would hold. The arch held firm. It held for 427 years, becoming the heart and soul of the city, a symbol of community, beauty, and the quiet confidence of great engineering. We will return to this bridge later in our story because its fate, its destruction, and its rebuilding is one of the most emotionally powerful bridge stories of our time. In the lands ruled by the Mughal emperors of India, bridge building reflected the empire's grand ambitions and its blending of different cultural traditions. The Mughals built bridges that combined the engineering knowledge of Persia with the craftsmanship of India, creating structures that were both strong and ornamental. One of the greatest Mughal rulers commissioned numerous bridges as part of an extensive road-building program connecting the capital to the provinces. These bridges featured the pointed arches that are a hallmark of Islamic architecture and were often decorated with carved floral patterns, reflecting the Mughal love of gardens and natural beauty. Throughout the Islamic world, the tradition of charitable giving played an important role in bridge building. Building a bridge was considered an act of religious merit, and many bridges were funded through charitable foundations that also paid for inns, places of worship, and bathhouses near the crossing. The combination of a bridge and a traveler's inn was especially common along the great trade routes, where a person could cross a river and find shelter, food, and rest on the other side. The engineering contributions of Islamic bridge builders are still being fully appreciated by historians. The pointed arch, which carries weight more efficiently than the half-circle arch the Romans used, appeared in Islamic bridges centuries before it showed up in European Gothic cathedrals. Islamic engineers developed sophisticated methods for building in riverbeds, and their use of decorative stonework, geometric patterns, and carved inscriptions transformed bridges from plain structures into genuine works of art. But perhaps the most important contribution of the Islamic world to bridge design was the idea that a bridge could be more than just a way to get across. In the Western tradition, bridges have usually been thought of as purely practical, built to carry traffic and nothing more. In the Islamic tradition, bridges were imagined as social spaces, places where the life of a city could come together, where music could be played and tea could be shared, and the simple pleasure of sitting by a river could be savored in the company of neighbors and strangers alike. It is an idea that modern city planners are only now beginning to rediscover. Today, on the bridges of Isfahan, the tradition continues. Families still gather in the evenings. Musicians still play beneath the arches. The bridges that were built 4 centuries ago still serve the purpose they were always intended to serve, not merely as ways to cross a river, but as places where people come together, where the pace of life slows down, and where the quiet sound of water flowing beneath old stone arches is enough to make an evening feel complete. And now, having explored the bridge as a place of gathering and beauty, let us turn to a very different aspect of the bridge's history. The bridge as a prize of war, a fortress, and a target for destruction. In the year 508 before the Common Era, 3 Roman soldiers stood at the far end of a wooden bridge and prepared to die. The bridge was the oldest in Rome, a timber structure spanning the Tiber River that had stood for more than a century. Behind the 3 soldiers on the Roman side, their comrades were frantically hacking at the bridge's timbers, trying to destroy it before the enemy could cross. In front of them, bearing down at full charge, was the entire army of a powerful king who had come to take Rome by force. The bridge had been built entirely of wood, deliberately constructed without metal fasteners. This meant it could be dismantled quickly, but not quickly enough. The 3 defenders held the narrow far end, fighting sword against sword and shield against shield, buying precious time. When the bridge began to tremble and crack, the leader of the three ordered his two companions to retreat. They did as he commanded. He stood alone on the bridge. He continued to fight, holding back the entire army by the simple reality that only one or two attackers could reach him at a time on the narrow bridge. Then, with a great crash, the bridge collapsed into the Tiber behind him. Still wearing his armor, he leaped into the river and swam to the Roman shore. Whether or not this story happened exactly as it was told, it became one of the founding legends of Rome, and it established a truth that would echo through the next 2,500 years of military history. Whoever controls the bridge controls the battlefield. Bridges are uniquely valuable military targets. They concentrate all movement into a narrow corridor that can be easily defended or easily blocked. They are difficult to replace once destroyed, and they carry a psychological weight that few other structures can match. An army that loses its bridge loses its line of retreat, and that can transform an orderly withdrawal into a complete disaster. For all these reasons, bridges have been among the most fought-over structures in the long history of war. Medieval Europe understood this perfectly. Fortified bridges with defensive towers, gates, and thick walls built right into the structure were common throughout the continent. In Verona, a fortified bridge was designed specifically as an escape route from the ruling family's fortress, allowing them to flee across the river if the city fell to enemies. In southern France, a bridge with 3 tall towers served as a defended gateway controlling access to the city. In Wales, a bridge from the 13th century still has its medieval gatehouse tower standing, the only surviving example of its kind in all of Britain. The destruction of bridges as a military tactic is as old as bridge warfare itself. When an army retreated, it destroyed the bridges behind it. When an army advanced, it tried to capture bridges intact. This push and pull created some of the most desperate and dramatic moments in military history. During the American Civil War, both sides maintained specialized units whose sole job was building temporary bridges under fire. Generals on both sides understood that controlling the river crossings could determine the outcome of entire campaigns. One famous march through the southern states required the systematic destruction of railroad bridges to cut supply lines, while cavalry raiders on the other side made it their business to attack bridges behind enemy lines. In the wars fought by Napoleon, bridges played decisive roles in several major battles. In one famous engagement, Napoleon himself led a charge across a bridge over a river in Italy, an act of reckless bravery that burnished his reputation as a fearless commander. In the enormous Battle of Leipzig in 1813, the largest battle Europe had seen up to that time, the outcome was sealed when the only bridge across the river was destroyed too soon, trapping thousands of soldiers on the wrong side. Among those trapped was a Polish prince who drowned trying to swim to safety. The First Great War of the 20th century saw bridges become targets of bombardment on a scale never before imagined. The front lines depended on supply bridges far behind the fighting, and the development of aircraft added a new dimension to bridge warfare. For the first time, bridges could be attacked from the air, making them vulnerable even when they were far from the actual battlefield. But it was the Second Great War of the 20th century that elevated bridge warfare to its most dramatic heights, a story we will explore in detail in a later section. The bridges of that war, fought over with an intensity that reflected their enormous strategic importance, became some of the most famous battlegrounds of the entire conflict. Throughout all of this long military history, one truth holds constant. Bridges are what military thinkers call force multipliers. They amplify the power of whoever holds them and magnify the weakness of whoever does not. A bridge turns a river from a barrier into a highway, or from a highway into a trap. This double nature, the bridge as lifeline and the bridge as death trap, is what makes bridge warfare so intense and so important. The battles fought over bridges are often small in numbers but enormous in consequence, because the bridge itself concentrates all the strategic importance into a single physical point. The military history of bridges is also inevitably a history of destruction. Every bridge that has been fought over has been damaged or torn apart, often more than once. And yet, every bridge that has been destroyed has eventually been rebuilt, because the human need to rebuild connections is as powerful as the military instinct to break them. This tension between building and destroying, between connection and separation, sits at the very heart of the bridge's symbolic power. And now, let us leave the battlefield behind and step into a quieter world, one where bridges began to be seen not merely as tools of war or commerce, but as works of art. In 1345, a bridge opened in Florence that was both an engineering advance and a hint of the great artistic flowering that was about to begin. The bridge crossed the River Arno on a series of shallow, flattened arches, curves so gentle that the roadway across the top was nearly level, a real improvement over the steep climbs required by the old half-circle Roman arches. It was the first bridge of this kind built in the West, and though its builders may not have known it, they were using the same principle that Li Chun had used in China 7 centuries earlier. East and West had arrived at the same solution independently, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years. This bridge quickly became more than just a crossing. Shops grew up along its length as they did on many medieval bridges. But in 1565, the ruling family of Florence transformed it into something quite new. They commissioned a famous architect to build an enclosed corridor running above the shops, connecting the seat of government on one bank to the family's private residence on the other. This corridor allowed the rulers to move between home and work without ever setting foot on the street, a bridge on top of a bridge, built for the exclusive use of the most powerful family in the city. To further enhance the bridge's prestige, the ruler decreed that the butchers who had occupied the shops must be replaced by goldsmiths and jewelers, a decree that remains in effect to this day, nearly 5 centuries later. If you visit that bridge now, you will still find the jewelers in their tiny shops, selling gold and silver exactly where their predecessors sold it during the age of the Renaissance. This bridge survived another dramatic moment in 1944, when a retreating army destroyed every bridge in Florence except this one. It was spared, reportedly on the personal orders of a commander who had visited the bridge before the war and admired its beauty. The buildings at either end were demolished to block the road, but the bridge itself survived intact, the only one in the city to do so. In Venice, the answer to Florence's famous bridge was the oldest crossing of the Grand Canal. The site had been spanned by a series of wooden bridges, the last of which collapsed under the weight of a crowd watching a boat procession. The decision to build a permanent stone replacement triggered one of the most famous architectural competitions of the age. Designs were submitted by some of the greatest architects then living, but the commission ultimately went to a less well-known builder whose design featured a single marble arch spanning nearly 50 meters, lined with shops on both sides. It was a triumph of both engineering and beauty, and it remains one of the most recognized bridges in the world. The Renaissance also saw the beginning of bridge design as a subject for serious study. A great Venetian architect devoted part of his most influential book to bridge design, describing several approaches to building wooden bridges using triangular frameworks. This was the first time anyone had written down the principles of what engineers now call truss design, a system of triangles that distributes weight with remarkable efficiency. The truss would become one of the most important ideas in all of bridge engineering, and its first written description came not from an engineer but from an architect who saw the bridge as a subject worthy of the same intellectual attention as a palace or a temple. As Europe moved from the Renaissance into the period known as the Enlightenment, a new attitude toward bridge building took hold. The application of mathematics and scientific reasoning to what had previously been a craft learned through experience and tradition. In France, a new engineering school was founded in 1747, the first of its kind in the world, dedicated to training people in the science of building roads and bridges. Its first director developed new theories of arch design that allowed bridges to be built with thinner, more elegant shapes, using less stone while carrying the same weight. His approach, based on careful calculation rather than inherited rules of thumb, marked the beginning of what we now call structural engineering. In England, the Enlightenment's most famous bridge was an accidental celebrity. At a college in Cambridge, a wooden bridge was built in 1749 with an elegant geometric design. Legend quickly grew up around it, claiming that it had been designed by the great scientist Isaac Newton and assembled without any fasteners at all, held together purely by the perfection of its mathematics. In truth, Newton had died more than 20 years before the bridge was built, and the structure had always used bolts and nails. But the legend persisted, perhaps because it captured the defining dream of the Enlightenment, the belief that mathematics and reason could explain and control the physical world, that even something as earthy as a bridge could be reduced to pure geometry. By the end of the 1700s, the bridge was no longer merely a piece of useful infrastructure. It had become a subject for art, for science, and for philosophical reflection. It had become a canvas for human expression and a symbol of our ability to shape the world around us. The stage was set for a revolution that was about to change bridge building forever, a revolution that would begin in a small valley in Shropshire, England, where a family of metalworkers was about to change the world with a material that had never before been used to build a bridge. In the Severn Gorge in Shropshire, England, the air in the late 1700s smelled of sulphur and hot metal. The hillsides glowed orange at night from the furnaces that lined the riverbanks. This was the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution, a valley where 3 generations of a single family had been transforming the world by figuring out how to produce iron more cheaply and in far greater quantities than ever before. The grandfather had made the breakthrough early in the century. Now the grandson was about to take the family legacy to its most visible achievement, the world's first bridge made entirely of iron. The idea came not from the ironmaster, but from a local architect who saw an opportunity. The existing ferry crossing over the gorge was slow, unreliable, and dangerous, and the steep, unstable banks made a traditional stone bridge impractical. The architect proposed something that had never been attempted, a bridge cast from iron. The ironmaster, whose family had the furnaces and the skill to produce the pieces, agreed to the project. Work began in 1777. The bridge was cast in large sections, each one a half arch that would be raised into place and joined at the top. The casting was done at the nearby ironworks, just a few hundred meters from the bridge site, and the pieces were hauled to the river by horses. The total weight of iron used was roughly 378 tons, spread across nearly 1,700 individual pieces. The single arch spans just over 100 feet, rising above the water in a graceful curve. The bridge was finished in 1779 and opened to traffic in 1781. And here is a detail worth pausing on. The iron pieces were joined using methods borrowed from woodworking, including joints that any carpenter would recognize. The bridge's builders were thinking in wood but building in iron, a characteristic of this transitional moment in engineering history. The old craft had not yet let go, even as the new material was pulling the world forward. The response was extraordinary. Artists, engineers, and curious travelers came from across Europe to marvel at the bridge. It became one of the most painted and engraved structures in England, a symbol of the new industrial age and proof that iron could be used not just for tools and weapons, but for architecture on a grand scale. The bridge showed that cast iron, which was becoming cheaper every year, could replace stone and timber as a primary building material. The impact on bridge engineering was immediate. Within a decade, iron bridges were being built across Britain and Europe. One bridge completed just 17 years later used iron to span more than double the distance. In France, one of the first iron bridges opened in 1803. In America, the first iron bridge was built in 1839, and by the middle of the century, iron bridges were the standard for major crossings. But the iron bridge also revealed the limits of its material. Cast iron is strong when you press on it. It can bear enormous weight pushing down, but it is brittle when you pull on it. It cracks rather than bends. This meant cast iron was ideal for arch bridges, where the metal is always being squeezed together, but it was dangerous for bridges where parts of the structure are being pulled apart. The tragic consequences of ignoring this difference would become painfully clear in the bridge disasters of the following century. The architect who first imagined the bridge died in 1777 before construction was even finished. The ironmaster who funded and supervised the project lived to see its triumph, but was left deeply in debt. The bridge cost far more than anyone had planned. The ironmaster died in 1789 at only 39 years old, his health broken by the strain. Greatness, as so often happens in this story, came at a personal cost. But the bridge's influence reached far beyond engineering. It became a pilgrimage site for the industrial age, drawing visitors who understood that they were witnessing the birth of something new. An industrialist from Sweden visited the bridge and went home to build iron bridges in his own country. Engineers from Russia studied the design and applied it to bridges along their expanding canal system. The bridge inspired not just imitation, but imagination. It made people think differently about what was possible, about what materials could do, about the changing relationship between human ambition and the natural world. Before this bridge, a bridge was a natural object in a certain sense, made from the same things the landscape was made from: stone and wood and rope. After this bridge, a bridge was an industrial product, manufactured in a factory and assembled on site. This shift from craft to industry would define the next 2 centuries of bridge engineering. Today, the bridge is recognized as one of the most important historical sites in England. It no longer carries vehicles, and it was temporarily closed for restoration, but pedestrians can still walk across the same iron arches that launched the age of metal bridges more than 200 years ago. The Iron Bridge was a turning point in history. Before it, bridges were made from the same materials humans had used for thousands of years. After it, a new vocabulary of materials, iron, then steel, then concrete, then cable, would transform bridge engineering beyond recognition. The age of the stonemason was giving way to the age of the engineer, and the engineer's materials would be forged in fire rather than carved from the earth. Let us meet one of those engineers now, a shepherd's son who would build more bridges than almost anyone in history. Thomas Telford was born in 1757 in a tiny parish in the hills of southern Scotland. His father was a shepherd who died when Thomas was still an infant, leaving the boy to be raised in poverty by his mother in a stone cottage with a dirt floor. Nothing in his beginnings suggested that he would become one of the greatest engineers in history. But Telford had 2 gifts that would carry him further than anyone could have predicted: an endless curiosity about how things worked and an extraordinary ability to teach himself. He learned to read on his own, apprenticed himself to a stonemason at the age of 14, and spent his evenings studying architecture and mathematics from borrowed books. By his 30s, Telford had risen from unknown stonemason to the chief surveyor of an entire county, where he first saw the iron bridge at Coalbrookdale and began to understand the possibilities it represented. He started designing bridges of his own, beginning with modest stone structures and gradually increasing in ambition. It was his appointment as the engineer of a major canal project that transformed his career and gave him the chance to build on a scale he had never imagined. That canal project produced one of Telford's most spectacular works, an aqueduct that carries the canal across a wide valley in northeastern Wales at a height of 126 feet above the river below. Imagine that for a moment. A channel of water wide enough for boats running through a cast iron trough supported by 19 stone arches, all floating high above the valley floor. People who cross it in narrow boats today describe the experience as both terrifying and beautiful. On one side, a thin railing separates the boat from a sheer drop. On the other, the towpath is barely wide enough for a horse. This aqueduct is now recognized as one of the great engineering achievements in history, but Telford's crowning achievement was a suspension bridge completed in 1826 that connected an island off the coast of Wales to the mainland. The bridge was needed because an Act of Parliament had united Britain and Ireland, dramatically increasing the traffic on the road from London to the main port for Dublin. The narrow and dangerous stretch of water between the mainland and the island was the greatest obstacle on the route, and Telford was given the job of crossing it. His design was bold. The central span stretched 579 feet, supported by chains of wrought iron suspended from two massive stone towers more than 150 feet tall. The roadway hung 100 feet above the water, high enough for the tallest sailing ships to pass beneath without trouble. Each chain was manufactured at a special forge and tested individually before being lifted into position. When the first chain was raised, Telford reportedly stayed up all night watching the operation, unable to rest until he was certain it was secure. This bridge was one of the world's first major suspension bridges, and it proved that suspension technology could be scaled to span distances that stone arches or iron beams could never reach. It opened a new chapter in bridge engineering, one that would eventually lead to the great suspension bridges of the 20th century. The numbers of Telford's career are staggering. During his lifetime, he was responsible for building over 1,000 miles of road, over 1,000 bridges, 40 harbors, and several major canals. He was chosen as the first president of the new professional organization for civil engineers, a post he held for 14 years until his death. A town in Shropshire was later named in his honor. Telford was not alone in transforming bridge engineering during this period. Other Scottish and English engineers of similar background were pushing the art forward. One designed elegant bridges across the Thames in London. A family of railway engineers, father and son, brought their knowledge of locomotives and tracks to bridge design, building structures that tested the limits of what iron could do. The early 1800s were the period when bridge engineering became a true profession. Before Telford and his generation, bridges were built by master masons working from experience and tradition handed down through the centuries. After them, bridges were designed by trained engineers working from mathematical calculations and careful testing. The shift was not always smooth, and the tension between old-fashioned craftsmanship and new scientific methods would sometimes produce spectacular failures. But it was irreversible. The age of the professional bridge engineer had begun, and the bridges that followed would be larger, longer, and more daring than anything the world had seen before. Telford himself remained modest throughout his life. He never married, lived simply, and devoted all his energy to his work. He died in London in 1834 and was buried in Westminster Abbey, an honor rarely given to engineers. His grave lies in the nave of the Abbey, near the tombs of kings and poets, a fitting resting place for a shepherd's son who built 1,000 bridges and changed the face of his country. And now, let us follow the path that Telford's bridges helped to open into an era of roaring engines and iron tracks, when the demand for bridges would explode beyond anything the world had ever known, the age of the rail. When the first major railway opened in 1830, it carried passengers at speeds that no human being had ever experienced, roughly 30 miles per hour, a velocity that many respected doctors warned would be fatal. The blood would boil, they predicted. The lungs would collapse. None of this happened, of course, and within a decade, railway fever had gripped Britain and was spreading across Europe and America. Between 1830 and 1870, approximately 15,000 miles of railway were built in Britain alone, and every mile of track required bridges, bridges to cross rivers, bridges to span valleys, bridges to carry the railway over roads and over other railways. The hunger for bridges was without precedent, and it produced a generation of engineers whose ambitions matched the age. The two great figures of Victorian bridge engineering were a cautious mathematician and a flamboyant daredevil, professional rivals and personal friends whose contrasting styles produced some of the most remarkable bridges of the century. The cautious one was methodical, deeply versed in the science of structural strength. The daring one was willing to take risks that made his colleagues hold their breath. The cautious engineer's masterwork was a bridge that carried a railway across the same dangerous strait in Wales that Telford had bridged a quarter-century earlier. The challenge was enormous. A railway bridge needed to bear the weight of heavy locomotives and fully loaded freight trains, loads far greater than anything a road bridge had to carry. A suspension bridge would sway too much under such weight, and a conventional arch would block ship traffic below. The solution was something entirely new, a bridge that was essentially a giant hollow iron tube, large enough for a train to pass through, resting on massive stone supports. The engineer worked with a colleague who ran careful tests on small models to determine the right proportions. The tubes were built on shore, floated into position on the high tide, and raised into place by machines. When the last piece was fitted, the daring engineer is said to have remarked, with perhaps a touch of jealousy, that if this bridge succeeded, then all of his own bridges had been magnificent failures. The daring engineer's response was a bridge across the Tamar River, combining an arched tube with a suspension chain in a design that was entirely his own invention. It was completed in 1859, the same year he died, worn out by a lifetime of impossibly ambitious projects. His bridge, with its two great spans, each over 450 feet long, was assembled on shore and floated into position, a technique he had borrowed from his rival, though he would never have admitted it. In America, the railway age demanded a very different kind of bridge building. The vast distances and varied landscape of the American continent required tens of thousands of bridges, and the speed of railway expansion meant they had to go up quickly and cheaply. The result was the timber trestle bridge, a distinctly American creation that used wooden frames to build bridges of remarkable height and length across mountain valleys and river gorges. Some of these trestle bridges were terrifying to cross, rickety-looking structures of stacked lumber stretching high above the valley floor. But they carried the railways forward, mile after mile, across a continent. The railway age also produced the first standardized bridge designs. Railway companies, needing to build bridges fast and in large numbers, developed template plans that could be adapted to different sites with only minor changes. Certain designs for triangular framework bridges patented in the 1840s became some of the most widely used bridge plans in American history. These designs could be built in workshops and put together on site, allowing bridges to go up in weeks rather than years. The speed of bridge construction during this period was breathtaking. In the United States alone, by 1880, there were more than 100,000 railway bridges in service. Many of them had been built under enormous pressure to keep pace with the expanding railway network, and the results were not always safe. The constant demand for speed and economy meant that shortcuts were taken, inspections were skipped, and designs were pushed to their limits. The consequences of this haste would become tragically clear in the decades that followed, as bridges built too quickly with too little room for error began to fail under the daily stresses of heavy use. The railway age had transformed bridge building from a specialized craft into an industrial process, creating demand for new materials and new methods. But it had also created a new kind of danger, the danger that comes from building too much too fast. And the price of that danger, as we shall see in the next section of our story, would be paid in human lives. On the evening of December 28, 1879, a violent storm swept across a wide stretch of water in eastern Scotland. The wind roared at speeds that the bridge's designer had never imagined possible. A train from Edinburgh carrying 75 passengers entered the high section of the bridge, the long exposed span that rose above the tops of the supports to let sailing ships pass underneath. Somewhere in the darkness, in the howling wind, the high spans gave way. The entire central section of the bridge, along with the train and every soul aboard, plunged into the icy water below. There were no survivors. The disaster sent shockwaves through the engineering profession that are still felt today. The bridge had been designed by a well-known engineer who had been honored by the Queen just months before the collapse. The bridge was enormous, stretching nearly 2 miles across the water, using millions of bricks and rivets and huge quantities of cement. But the designer had made a fatal error. He had not properly accounted for the force of the wind in his calculations. The bracing and fastenings that held the bridge together were simply not strong enough to resist a gale blowing sideways against the structure, and the construction had not been carefully supervised. Investigations found that cheaply made materials had been used in critical parts, with hidden flaws that weakened them from the start. The official inquiry delivered a verdict that was devastating in its simplicity. The bridge was badly designed, badly constructed, and badly maintained. The engineer, who had been one of the most celebrated in Britain, saw his reputation destroyed overnight. He died just 10 months after the disaster, a broken man. The consequences reached far beyond one career. The disaster forced the engineering profession to confront how little it understood about wind forces. It pushed forward research into how wind affects large structures, research that continues to this day. And it accelerated the shift from cast iron to a newer, stronger material, steel, as the preferred choice for building bridges. 6 decades later, on the morning of November 7, 1940, a very different kind of failure unfolded in the American state of Washington. A suspension bridge that workers had nicknamed for its habit of swaying in the wind began to move in a 42-mile-per-hour breeze. The movement started small, with the road surface rising and falling in gentle waves. Then, as the wind continued, the motion changed. Instead of simply bobbing up and down, the bridge began to twist, one side rising while the other fell. The twisting grew steadily worse, the road tilting at ever more extreme angles, until finally, at 11 in the morning, the main section tore apart and collapsed into the water below. The collapse was captured on film by a local camera shop owner who had been recording the bridge's movements. His footage became one of the most viewed engineering failures in history, shown in classrooms around the world as a cautionary example. The only life lost, thankfully, was that of a small dog who had been left in a car on the bridge and could not be persuaded to leave before the collapse. The failure was caused by a phenomenon in which the wind and the bridge fed off each other, the wind creating twisting forces that grew larger with each cycle, building and building until the structure could not hold together. The bridge had been designed with a very shallow, flat profile and solid sides that caught the wind like a sail, making it especially vulnerable. At sustained wind speeds above about 35 miles per hour, the twisting became unstoppable. This disaster changed bridge engineering permanently. Before it, the effects of wind on bridges were largely ignored in design. After it, testing bridges against wind forces in specially built tunnels became a standard part of the design process. Every major suspension bridge built since 1940 has been designed with wind behavior as a primary concern. Other failures have left their own painful lessons. In 1847, a railway bridge collapsed under the weight of a train, revealing the weakness of cast iron when it is being pulled apart rather than pressed together. In 1876, a bridge in the American state of Ohio collapsed during a blizzard, killing 92 people and exposing the dangers of skipped inspections. In 1907, a partially completed bridge in Canada crashed into a river, killing 75 workers, including 33 men from a single community, a loss that would reshape their traditions forever. Each failure taught the engineering world something it did not know: the force of wind, the twisting effect of certain shapes, the slow weakening of metal over time, the hidden damage of rust and corrosion, the danger of skipping inspections, the cost of designing too thin and building too cheap. The history of bridge engineering is, in a very real sense, a history of learning from failure. Every bridge that stands safely today stands because somewhere in the past, another bridge fell, and someone had the courage to ask why and the wisdom to change the way things were done. The price of these lessons was paid in human lives. The passengers on that Scottish train, the workers who fell with the Canadian bridge, the travelers lost in the Ohio blizzard, they are the unwilling teachers of engineering progress. Their deaths were not inevitable, and the failures that killed them were, in almost every case, preventable. But the knowledge gained from studying those failures has saved countless lives since, making bridges safer and stronger than those earlier engineers could ever have imagined. And from the shadow of one of these disasters, the greatest bridge of the Victorian age would rise, built with such enormous strength that it could never fall. Let us visit that bridge now. On the afternoon of June 28, 1869, a man named John Roebling was standing on a cluster of wooden posts at a ferry dock in Lower Manhattan, surveying the site where the greatest bridge of the age would rise when a ferry boat crushed his right foot against the timbers. The injury seemed survivable at first, but Roebling, a man who trusted his own judgment above all others, refused to let doctors remove the damaged toes. Within days, a terrible infection set in. 3 weeks later, the most celebrated bridge engineer in America was dead, and the enormous project he had spent years planning, a bridge that would be the longest suspension bridge in the world, had lost its creator before a single stone had been laid. The bridge fell to his son, Washington Roebling, 32 years old, a veteran of the Civil War who had studied bridge engineering in Europe, took over as chief engineer. He inherited his father's plans, but not his father's health. The building of this bridge would nearly kill him too, and the story of the Roebling family's struggle to complete it is one of the most extraordinary human dramas in the entire history of engineering. The elder Roebling had been given the assignment to build a suspension bridge spanning the East River between Brooklyn and Manhattan, a distance of nearly 1,600 feet. No one had ever built a suspension bridge that long. The bridge would need to carry not only people walking and carriages rolling, but eventually the heavy loads of an elevated railway. The design called for 4 massive cables, each nearly 16 inches across, suspended from 2 stone towers that would rise 276 feet above the water, taller than any building in either Brooklyn or Manhattan at the time. The cables would be woven from steel wire, a material that Roebling had helped develop in his earlier career. It was a plan of breathtaking ambition, and many engineers doubted it could be done. Washington Roebling threw himself into the work. The first and most dangerous phase was building the foundations, which required sinking enormous wooden boxes open at the bottom to the riverbed and then digging out the mud and rock inside them to reach solid ground below. Workers entered these boxes through sealed doorways and labored in air pumped to high pressure at the bottom of the river, digging through sand and clay in near-total darkness, breathing air that tasted stale and strange. The work was grueling and frightening. Fires broke out inside the boxes with alarming frequency, and the pressurized air caused a mysterious illness. Workers suffered agonizing pain in their joints, temporary inability to move, and in some cases, death. We know now that this was caused by tiny bubbles forming in the bloodstream when workers returned too quickly to normal air pressure. At the time, no one understood the cause. Washington Roebling himself was struck down by this illness in 1872. His worst attack left him partially unable to move, with damaged eyesight and hearing. He was confined to his bed in an apartment overlooking the construction site, unable to visit the bridge in person. His mind, however, remained sharp, and at this point, a third member of the family entered the story. Emily Warren Roebling had married Washington after meeting him at a military event. She was intelligent, well-educated, and possessed of a fierce determination. When her husband was confined to bed, Emily became his eyes, ears, and voice on the project. She visited the construction site daily, relaying instructions to the assistant engineers and reporting back on the progress of the work. She taught herself mathematics and construction techniques until she could speak to the engineers in their own language. She negotiated with contractors, dealt with politicians, and managed the project's complicated business. For more than a decade, Emily Warren Roebling was, in practice, the chief engineer of the bridge, though she never held the title. Her role was so visible that when rumors spread that Washington was too ill to continue and the governing board considered replacing him, Emily appeared before a professional society to argue that her husband remained in command. The board agreed to keep him on. The bridge continued under Roebling management, Washington's mind directing Emily's presence overseeing, and the labor of hundreds of workers who risked their lives every day in the foundations and on the cables. The bridge opened on May 24, 1883, 14 years after the elder Roebling's death. The president attended the ceremony along with the governor and thousands of spectators. Emily Warren Roebling was the first person to cross the bridge by carriage, carrying a rooster as a symbol of victory. Washington watched from his apartment window, too ill to attend in person, but able to see the bridge he had spent half his life building finally completed. The bridge was immediately recognized as a wonder of its time. Its massive stone towers, its graceful sweep of cables, its unprecedented span, all of it was new, all of it was daring, and all of it worked. It became the most recognizable structure in New York and a symbol of what human determination and engineering skill could accomplish. At least 20 workers died during the 14 years of construction. Washington Roebling never fully recovered his health, but the bridge his family built, father, son, and the woman who held it all together, stands today as both an engineering triumph and a monument to the extraordinary resilience of the people who created it. Emily Warren Roebling went on to earn a law degree at the age of 55. She remains one of the most remarkable people in the history of engineering, a woman whose contributions were largely invisible in her own time, but are now recognized as essential to one of the greatest construction projects ever undertaken. And across the Atlantic, in the shadow of a different disaster, another monument of steel was about to rise. One of the bridge's designers had a gift for making complicated ideas simple. When he needed to explain how his new bridge would work to a public that had never seen anything like it, he staged a demonstration that became famous. He seated two men in chairs, had them stretch out their arms holding sticks, and then had a third man sit between them, supported by the outstretched arms and sticks of the other two. The two seated men represented the bridge's massive main supports. The third man, hovering in the air between them, represented the span. The photograph of this demonstration, published widely in 1887, became one of the most reproduced images in the history of engineering, and it did more to explain the principle behind the bridge than any amount of mathematics ever could. This bridge was born from disaster. The terrible collapse of the railway bridge over the nearby Tay estuary in 1879 had destroyed public trust in railway bridges, and when plans were needed for an even more ambitious crossing over the wider and more dangerous waterway of the Firth of Forth, the engineering profession knew that anything less than absolute safety would be unacceptable. The man who had designed the fallen bridge had actually been hired to design this one too. His plans were immediately torn up, and the job was given to two engineers who were determined to build something that could never fail. Their answer was massive strength beyond what anyone had ever attempted. The bridge uses roughly 54,000 tons of steel, held together by 6.5 million rivets. It consists of three enormous towers, each rising 361 feet above the water, connected by spans that create two main openings of more than 1,700 feet each. When it was completed in 1890, it had the longest spans of its type in the world. Construction took 8 years. At the busiest period, nearly 5,000 workers were employed on the bridge. They worked in conditions that were, even by the standards of that tough era, extremely dangerous. The bridge rises high above the water, and the Scottish weather punished the workers with rain, wind, and cold for much of the year. Falls were a common hazard. Injuries were a daily occurrence. The official count of workers killed during construction was initially recorded as 57, but later research by local historians has raised the number to at least 73, and some believe the true figure may be even higher. The bridge was also notable for being the first major structure in Britain built entirely of steel rather than iron. Steel was stronger, more flexible, and more reliable than the iron that had been used in the bridge that fell. Its use here proved that steel was the material of the future for large-scale construction, a lesson that every major bridge project afterward would follow. The bridge opened on March 4, 1890, when the future king drove home the final rivet, one made of gold, for the ceremony. The bridge was an immediate sensation. Its enormous red-painted framework, visible for miles around, became one of the most recognizable structures in the world. It also gave English speakers a new expression. The phrase "painting the bridge" became a way of describing a task that never ends, based on the popular belief that the maintenance crew finished painting one end just in time to start again at the other. This was somewhat exaggerated. The bridge was actually repainted on a roughly 20-year cycle, but the phrase captured the imagination and has endured ever since. The bridge received international heritage recognition in 2015, celebrated as a masterpiece of creative talent and a landmark in the history of steel construction. The recognition noted that it was a turning point in bridge design and a milestone in the use of new materials. There is something worth reflecting on here if you have a quiet moment. This bridge was built as a direct response to tragedy. Every ton of its steel, every one of its millions of rivets, carries the weight of a lesson learned from the bridge that fell before it. The engineers designed it to be unbreakable precisely because the previous bridge had broken. It is not beautiful in the way a cathedral is beautiful, with grace and lightness and soaring lines. It is too massive for that, too industrial, too frankly mechanical. But it possesses a different kind of beauty. The beauty of absolute competence, of a structure that does exactly what it was designed to do and will go on doing it for as long as steel holds together. The bridge stands today as a monument to the idea that there is no shortcut to safety and no acceptable margin for error when human lives are at stake. And as we move forward in our story, crossing into the era of empire and colonial expansion, we will see that bridges continued to be shaped by the forces of power and politics, built to serve ambitions that were not always noble, and maintained by labor that was not always free. A powerful man in Cape Town drew a line on a map, a line that would stretch the entire length of Africa from south to north, connecting the Cape of Good Hope to Cairo by rail. He decreed that the railway would cross the Zambezi River at a place where the water plunges 355 feet into a great gorge, a waterfall so immense that the local people called it the smoke that thunders. His instructions to the engineers were characteristically grand. He told them to build the bridge where the trains, as they passed, would catch the spray of the falling water. The man died in 1902 before the bridge was built, but his vision was carried out. The bridge was completed in just 14 months and opened in 1905. It is a steel arch spanning 500 feet, with its deck more than 400 feet above the river below, and it was designed by engineers who would later go on to design the Great Harbour Bridge of Sydney. Materials were shipped to the remote site by the very railway the bridge was meant to serve, and they were carried across the gorge by a cable system while the arch took shape below. This bridge was not merely an engineering project. It was an instrument of empire. The line across Africa was never completed. The dream died with its originator, but the bridges and railways built in its pursuit served a clear purpose. They opened mineral-rich regions to extraction, connected colonial government centers, and enabled the movement of raw materials from the interior to the coastal ports. The people who lived along these routes were rarely the ones who benefited most. The bridges of empire were built for the empire, and the labor that built them was often forced, underpaid, or both. In British-controlled India, colonial bridge building reached an enormous scale. The British railway network in India, which by 1900 was the fourth largest in the world, required thousands of bridges across the vast landscape of rivers, valleys, and gorges. The most famous crossing in the great city of Kolkata was originally a floating bridge built in the 1870s, with its parts manufactured in England and shipped to India for assembly. This floating bridge, which rose and fell with the tides and could not handle heavy traffic, served for decades before being replaced in the 1940s by a massive cantilever bridge. The replacement bridge was built using high-quality steel, largely supplied by an Indian company, a detail that carries a certain symbolic weight. It was held together entirely by rivets, without a single bolt, and upon opening it quickly became one of the busiest bridges in the world, carrying more than 100,000 vehicles and countless people on foot every day. It is an engineering marvel, but it is also a reminder of the complicated legacy of colonial infrastructure, designed by foreign engineers, funded by colonial administration, built with local materials and local labor, and serving a public that had no voice in its planning. The darkest chapter of bridge building in the colonial era belongs to a railway built during the Second Great War. The railway stretched more than 400 kilometers through dense jungle between Thailand and what was then called Burma, and it was constructed by the military forces of an occupying power using forced labor from both prisoners of war and local civilians. The railway required hundreds of bridges, including one over a river in Thailand that became immortalized in both a novel and a famous film. The reality was far worse than any story could capture. At least 250,000 civilians were forced to work on the railway, and more than 90,000 of them died during construction. Of the more than 60,000 prisoners of war enslaved on the project, approximately 13,000 perished. The conditions were beyond description. Workers labored through mosquito-filled jungle in torrential rain, breaking rock with hand tools, wading through mud, dying of disease and exhaustion. At one particularly brutal section, where workers carved through solid rock by hand, only 100 of the original 1,000 prisoners survived to see the work completed. Colonial bridge building was not limited to the largest empires. In every colonized territory from Southeast Asia to Africa to South America, the occupying powers built bridges that served their own interests and were built by local populations who had little choice in the matter. These bridges opened territories to resource extraction, connected plantations to ports, and enabled small numbers of colonial officials to control vast regions. The legacy of these bridges is deeply mixed. Many of them remain in use today, serving the descendants of the people who were colonized. The bridge at the Great Waterfall still carries rail and road traffic between two independent African nations. The bridge in Kolkata still serves millions of people. The bridges of that terrible jungle railway, or what remains of them, stand as memorials to suffering. These bridges cannot be separated from the circumstances of their creation. They were instruments of empire, built through exploitation and designed for the benefit of the occupier. But they are also simply bridges, structures that allow people to cross from one side to the other, whatever purpose that crossing may serve. And now, let us travel to the coast of California, where the most famous bridge in the world was about to rise from the fog. The man who did most of the mathematics for the most famous bridge on Earth was not a trained engineer at all. He was a professor of ancient Greek who had taught himself structural analysis with such intensity that he became one of the most brilliant minds in American bridge design. In 1922, he was hired by a bridge-building firm in Chicago, and over the next decade he performed the vast majority of the calculations that would make it possible to build a suspension bridge across one of the most punishing stretches of water on the planet. And for his trouble, he was fired. The story of the Golden Gate Bridge is, on its surface, a story of triumph, a gleaming masterpiece rising above the fog at the entrance to San Francisco Bay. But beneath that surface lies a more complicated tale of credit stolen and contributions erased. of a man who spent the rest of his life seeking recognition for a bridge that bore another man's name. The strait at the Golden Gate is roughly 1 mile wide, but its conditions are savage. Powerful tidal currents, dense fog, battering winds, and water more than 300 feet deep. In the early 1900s, most engineers considered the crossing impossible. The man who insisted it could be done was a stubborn, combative builder from Chicago who had constructed hundreds of small bridges but had never attempted anything on this scale. His original design was, by most accounts, clumsy and impractical. But he had something more valuable than a good design. He had an unstoppable political will. He spent years persuading city officials, fighting legal battles, and gathering public support for a bond measure to pay for construction. During those years of political struggle, the design quietly evolved from the original awkward proposal into the graceful suspension bridge that stands today. The Greek professor, working tirelessly in the Chicago office, redesigned the bridge almost entirely, developing the calculations that made the project possible. Another consultant contributed the mathematical theory that allowed the bridge deck to be more flexible and elegant than previous suspension bridges. And a relatively unknown architect from San Francisco designed the distinctive look of the bridge, the stepped tower faces, the horizontal lines, the curved railings, and the lighting that transforms the towers into geometric sculptures at night. It was this same architect who chose the color. The steel arrived coated in a reddish-orange primer, and the architect recognized that this warm color would look beautiful against the blue sky, the gray fog, and the green hills. The Navy had preferred black and yellow stripes to help ship captains see the bridge. The architect won the argument, and the shade he selected became one of the most recognized colors in the world. Construction began in January 1933, during the worst years of the Great Depression. The project employed thousands of workers and cost roughly $35 million. Building across the Golden Gate required solving problems that had no precedent. The southern tower had to be built in open ocean, more than 1,000 feet from shore, in waters with fierce currents and unpredictable waves. Workers built a massive concrete enclosure in the open water, then pumped it dry and built the tower foundation inside it. During construction, a cargo ship struck the enclosure and sheared off a section, requiring months of repair. Working conditions on the bridge were terrifying. Wind, fog, and cold battered the site constantly. Workers balanced on narrow steel beams hundreds of feet above the churning water, buffeted by gusts that could knock a person off their feet. The project's chief engineer, to his great credit, insisted on safety measures that were far ahead of their time. He required hard hats, special goggles, and most importantly, a safety net stretched beneath the bridge deck during construction. The net cost a great deal of money, but it saved the lives of 19 men who fell from the bridge during the work. These 19 formed an informal club they called the Halfway to Hell Club, named for the terrifying sensation of falling before the net caught them. The net could not save everyone. In February 1937, just months before the bridge was finished, a scaffold carrying 12 men broke free and tore through the safety net. 10 of the 12 men fell to their deaths in the water far below. Investigation showed that the scaffold had been secured with bolts that were too small. In total, 11 workers died during the construction, a number that was tragic but remarkably low for a project of this scale. The bridge opened to pedestrians on May 27, 1937. 18,000 people gathered on each side at dawn, and when the foghorn sounded, they walked onto the bridge from both ends. Some of them ran. Others came on roller skates. One man played a harmonica as he crossed. The pedestrian celebration was followed the next day by an official opening for vehicles. The chief engineer took the credit. He placed his name on plaques, gave speeches, and positioned himself as the sole genius behind the bridge. The Greek professor, whom he had fired years earlier after a disagreement, received no mention at the opening and no credit in any official publication. The professor spent years writing letters trying to claim recognition for his work, but he died in 1949 with his role largely unknown. It was not until decades later that historians began to uncover the full story. In 2007, the Bridge Authority officially acknowledged that the professor had been the principal designer of the bridge's structural framework. In 2012, a plaque honoring him was placed on the bridge 75 years after it opened and 63 years after his death. The Golden Gate Bridge held the record as the world's longest suspension span for 27 years. But records are not what make it endure. It endures because of what it represents. The human ability to look at an impossible crossing and build something beautiful across it. And now, as war engulfed the world again, bridges would become the most fought-over structures on the planet. On the afternoon of March 7, 1945, a young American sergeant sprinted across a railway bridge in the German town of Remagen under a hail of machine gun fire. Behind him, soldiers of the advance guard ran in a crouch, expecting at every step to be blown into the river as German demolition charges went off beneath their feet. The charges had already been triggered twice. But the explosives, a weak substitute that had been issued instead of standard military materials, merely shuddered the bridge without bringing it down. The sergeant reached the far side, becoming the first soldier of the Western Allies to cross the Rhine by bridge since the days of Napoleon. Within 24 hours, 8,000 troops had poured across, and the last great natural barrier defending the German heartland had been broken. The capture of this bridge was one of the most important moments of the entire war, and it was completely unplanned. Allied commanders had expected every crossing over the Rhine to be demolished by the retreating German army. Elaborate plans had been made for massive river crossing operations using temporary bridges and assault boats. When word reached the Supreme Commander that an intact bridge had been captured, he immediately ordered his forces to pour through the opening. The German leader, upon learning that the bridge had been taken, ordered the officers responsible for failing to destroy it to be executed. The bridge itself did not last long. Weakened by the failed demolition, by German artillery aimed at it day and night, and by the tremendous traffic of military vehicles crossing around the clock, the bridge collapsed 10 days after its capture, killing 28 engineers who were working to strengthen it. By that time, however, temporary bridges had been built alongside it, and the crossing was secure. 6 months earlier, bridges had been the central objective of the most ambitious airborne operation in history. The plan, conceived by a British field marshal, aimed to capture a series of bridges across the rivers of the Netherlands, creating a highway corridor that would allow the Allied forces to cross the Rhine and outflank the enemy's main defensive line. American troops successfully captured bridges at 2 key cities, but at a third, where British paratroopers were supposed to seize a road bridge, everything went terribly wrong. A small force of about 700 paratroopers reached one end of the bridge and held it for 4 days against increasingly overwhelming counterattacks. They fought from houses and cellars, running low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies, while the ground forces that were supposed to rescue them were delayed by fierce resistance on the road behind. After 4 days, the paratroopers were overrun. The bridge was lost. The operation failed, and the Rhine remained unbreached until the following spring. The defeat became one of the most famous battles of the war, later captured in a book and film that gave us the phrase "a bridge too far." While these dramatic battles captured the world's attention, the unsung hero of the war's bridge story was a simple, portable steel structure designed by a quiet civil servant who tinkered with model bridges as a hobby. Before the war, he had proposed a design for a portable bridge to the military, which showed no interest. But by 1940, with existing military bridges unable to support modern heavy vehicles, the military looked again. The designer sketched his improved ideas on the back of an envelope during a train journey, and within months, the bridge was being manufactured. This portable bridge was a masterpiece of practical thinking. Its parts, steel panels and crossbeams, were small and light enough to be carried on trucks and put together by hand without any special tools or heavy machinery. A team of soldiers could build one across a river in a matter of hours, and the design could be built in single, double, or triple layers depending on how heavy the traffic would be. It was, in the words of one admiring officer, the engineering equivalent of a pocket knife. The first of these bridges was assembled across a river in North Africa in November of 1942. From that point on, they appeared everywhere the Allied forces fought. In the campaign through Italy alone, more than 3,000 were built, totaling 55 miles of bridging. They crossed rivers, filled gaps in bombed roads, and replaced destroyed structures at a speed that the enemy forces could not match. When the Great Invasion of France took place in June 1944, these bridges were among the first structures built on the beaches, allowing tanks and vehicles to move inland. The Supreme Commander later named this portable bridge one of the 3 most important inventions for winning the war. The designer was honored for his work, though the payment he received from the government was modest. Variations of his design remain in use today, in military operations and disaster relief around the world. The war was not limited to Europe, of course. In the Pacific, fierce battles were fought for bridges across the rivers and gorges of the Philippines, Burma, and the Pacific Islands. The bridges of the terrible Jungle Railway, built by prisoners and forced laborers, were bombed repeatedly by Allied aircraft, damaged, repaired by prisoner labor, and bombed again, a grim cycle that continued until the war ended. The lessons of that war permanently changed military engineering. The speed with which a bridge could be destroyed and the catastrophic consequences of losing a vital crossing made bridge construction and defense central concerns of every modern army. Every major military force in the world now trains specialized bridge building units and keeps stockpiles of portable bridging equipment ready at all times. The principle behind that portable bridge, simple parts, quick assembly, strong enough for heavy vehicles, remains the foundation of military bridge building to this day. And now, as the war ended and the world began to rebuild, a new material was about to reshape bridge building once again, a material that was cheap, abundant, and could be shaped into almost any form. Let us explore the age of concrete. In the summer of 1901, in a small Swiss village, a young engineer unveiled a bridge that made experienced bridge builders uneasy. It was a stone and concrete arch spanning a river, and it was made of a material that most engineers still regarded with deep suspicion: concrete strengthened with steel bars running through it. What unsettled them was not the material itself, but how thin the bridge looked. The arch was astonishingly slender, a curved ribbon of concrete that seemed too delicate to carry heavy traffic. Traditional bridges of that era were thick, heavy, and reassuringly massive. This bridge looked as though it might crack if someone leaned on it too hard. It did not crack. It stood for decades, carrying loads that its doubters had said it could never support. And in doing so, it announced the arrival of a material that would change bridge engineering more deeply than iron or steel ever had. The engineer's name was Robert Maillart, and he was born in Switzerland in 1872. He was not the first person to use concrete strengthened with metal in a bridge, but he was the first to understand that this was not simply a substitute for stone. Concrete was a new material with its own nature, its own logic, and its own beauty. Where stone was heavy and rigid, concrete could be shaped into curves and flowing forms that stone could never achieve. Where earlier engineers had built concrete bridges that looked like stone bridges, Maillart designed bridges that could only exist in concrete structures where the arch, the roadway, and the supporting walls were all part of one flowing, unified form. His finest work was a bridge completed in 1930, deep in a remote alpine gorge in Switzerland. The bridge leaps from one cliff face to the other in a single graceful arch, nearly 300 feet above the valley floor. The deck is held up by thin walls that rise from the arch and taper as they reach the road. creating a visual rhythm that is both structurally logical and deeply pleasing to the eye. This bridge was later recognized as one of the most important engineering structures in the world, the first concrete bridge to receive such an honor. It proves that efficiency and beauty are not opposing forces but natural partners. Maillart died in 1940, but the concrete revolution he helped start was given its greatest push forward by another innovator, a French engineer who solved the biggest problem that concrete had always faced. The problem was simple. Concrete is enormously strong when you press on it, but it is weak when you stretch it. When a concrete beam bends under the weight it is carrying, the bottom surface stretches, and concrete that stretches cracks. The French engineer's insight was elegant. If you could squeeze the concrete before any weight was placed on it, by threading tight steel cables through the concrete and anchoring them at each end, then the concrete would stay squeezed even when the bridge was loaded, because the weight on top would first have to overcome the squeezing force before any stretching could begin. The result was a material that combined the low cost and shapeability of concrete with a resistance to cracking that far exceeded what ordinary concrete could offer. This method was developed in the late 1920s, but the scientific world initially dismissed it. It was not until the inventor used his technique to rescue a major building whose foundations were dangerously sinking that the method was taken seriously. The rescue was dramatic and instantly earned the inventor worldwide attention. Within a few years, this new kind of concrete was being used for bridges across Europe. After the Second Great War, this improved concrete became the dominant material for bridge construction around the world. The reasons were mostly about money. Concrete was cheap and widely available. It could be made locally, unlike structural steel, which had to be produced at specialized factories and shipped long distances. Concrete bridges could be formed on-site or assembled from pieces made elsewhere, and they required less highly skilled labor than steel bridges. For the thousands of bridges needed to rebuild war-damaged Europe and to build new highway systems in America, Asia, and the developing world, this new concrete was the obvious choice. The results were not always pretty. The middle of the 20th century's hunger for bridges produced huge numbers of concrete structures that were functional but deeply uninspiring featureless highway overpasses and dull viaducts that deadened the landscapes they crossed. The artistry of Maillart, who had shown that concrete bridges could be works of grace, was largely forgotten in the rush to build as many bridges as possible, as quickly and cheaply as possible. But the real challenge with concrete bridges turned out to be time. Concrete ages, slowly but relentlessly. Water seeps into cracks, reaches the steel inside, and causes it to rust. Rust expands, forcing the concrete apart, creating more cracks, letting in more water. Salt from winter road treatment speeds the damage enormously. The freeze and thaw of winter and spring breaks the concrete from within. The bridges built during the great construction boom of the middle 20th century were typically designed to last about 50 years, and many of them have now reached or passed that age. The consequences of their deterioration, crumbling structures, weight limits, emergency closures, and in the worst cases, sudden collapse, have become one of the most pressing challenges of our time. Maillart's bridges in Switzerland, built with extraordinary care from the finest materials, have lasted more than a century with relatively little attention. The lesson they teach is that concrete bridges can endure, but only if they are built with skill, maintained with care, and designed with the understanding that cheapness at the time of building often means ruinous expense in the decades that follow. And it was precisely this lesson that would be tested on the largest scale imaginable when a single piece of legislation created the biggest bridge building project in human history. In the summer of 1919, a young army officer joined a military convoy that set out from Washington bound for the Pacific coast. The convoy was meant to prove that military vehicles could travel across the country by road. It was a disaster. The 81 vehicles crawled across America at an average speed of 6 miles per hour, broke down constantly on unpaved roads, and shattered bridges that could not bear the weight of army trucks. The journey took 62 days. The young officer never forgot the experience. 3.5 decades later, as the President of the United States, he signed the law that would create the largest public works project in American history, and in doing so, launched the greatest bridge-building effort the world had ever seen. The law, signed in 1956, authorized $25 billion for the construction of more than 40,000 miles of highways. It was the result of decades of pressure from automobile manufacturers, trucking companies, and state highway departments, all of whom stood to benefit enormously. The president's own motivation was partly military. He had seen the strategic value of good roads during the war in Europe, and partly economic, as the highway system would connect markets, reduce costs, and open up isolated regions. What the planners sometimes failed to emphasize was that building 40,000 miles of highway required building more than 55,000 bridges. Every river, every highway interchange, every overpass where one road crossed another, every passage over a railway line, all of these needed bridges. The highway system did not merely create a road network, it created a bridge network of a scale never before attempted. The bridges of this era were, out of necessity, standardized. The sheer number required made individual design impossible. Instead, highway departments developed template plans, concrete beam bridges, steel girder bridges, standard overpasses that could be adapted to different locations with only small changes. These designs were efficient, economical, and quick to build. They were also, for the most part, deeply plain. The typical highway bridge is a flat slab of concrete on concrete or steel supports, lacking any of the ambition that had once made bridge building an art. Function had triumphed over form entirely, and the result was a landscape of engineering sameness stretching from coast to coast. The social costs were enormous, and they fell most heavily on communities of color. In city after city, highway engineers routed their roads through neighborhoods where black families lived, demolishing homes, churches, schools, and businesses to make way for elevated highways and the bridges that carried them. In one city, the highway carved through a historically black neighborhood, destroying a vibrant community. In another, an elevated bridge highway was built directly over the main street of the black commercial district, erasing a place that had thrived for generations. In yet another, the highway displaced more than 10,000 residents and obliterated a neighborhood that had been a center of black culture and commerce. These were not accidents. Highway planners often deliberately chose routes through communities of color because the land was cheaper, the residents had less political power, and the destruction was dressed up as improvement. The bridges and overpasses of the highway system became, in many cities, physical walls separating communities, barriers as real and as harmful as any law that had been written. The damage is only now being recognized, and in some places, movements have begun to tear down the elevated highways and try to restore the neighborhoods they destroyed. Construction began in 1956. By the following year, most states had broken ground on their sections. At the peak of construction during the 1960s, thousands of bridges were being built at the same time across the entire country. The demand for concrete, steel, and construction workers was immense. Bridge building companies that had been small operations grew into enormous enterprises. New construction methods were developed to keep up with the pace, ways of building bridges from precast pieces that could be assembled like building blocks, methods for sliding steel beams into position from one end. The bridges were designed to last about 50 years. This did not mean they would fall down after 50 years. It meant that engineers expected them to perform well for about that, long before needing major work. By the 1990s and 2000s, many of these bridges were approaching or exceeding that age, and the effects were becoming visible: cracked concrete, rusting steel, crumbling joints, weight restrictions, and sometimes emergency closures that disrupted traffic for months. The highway system transformed the geography of the country. It made suburbs possible on a scale that had never existed, allowing people to live dozens of miles from their workplaces. It allowed long-distance trucking to replace railways for moving goods. It connected rural towns to city markets. And it did all of this on bridges, tens of thousands of them, most of them unnamed, most of them unnoticed, most of them taken for granted by the millions of drivers who cross them every single day. The highway bridge building boom was the largest single episode of bridge construction in all of human history. The Roman Empire, across centuries and continents, built perhaps a few thousand bridges. The American highway system built 55,000 in 2 decades. They are not beautiful bridges, and they were not built with future generations in mind. But they carry a nation, and the challenge of keeping them standing is one of the great problems of our time. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a nation of islands and earthquakes was developing bridge engineering capabilities that would push the art to new heights. At 5:46 in the morning on January 17, 1995, a powerful earthquake struck the Japanese city of Kobe. It killed more than 6,000 people, destroyed more than 100,000 buildings, and sent sections of elevated highway toppling sideways like fallen dominoes, their support columns snapped at the base. The images of collapsed highway bridges became some of the most powerful symbols of the earthquake's destruction. And yet, in the middle of Kobe's harbor, rising calmly above the devastation, the partially finished towers of what would become the longest suspension bridge span in the world stood undamaged. The earthquake had struck directly beneath the bridge site. The forces were powerful enough to push the 2 main towers more than 1 meter further apart, physically stretching the space the bridge was meant to cross. Engineers inspected the towers, found no structural damage, recalculated the measurements to fit the new, slightly wider span, and quietly continued building. When the bridge opened 3 years later, it held the world record for the longest suspension span, a record it kept for more than 2 decades. This bridge is the crowning achievement of a bridge engineering tradition that has few equals anywhere on Earth, but it is far from the only one. Japan, a nation of mountainous islands separated by treacherous straits and battered by storms and earthquakes, has been forced by its geography to develop bridge building skills at the very frontier of what is possible. The story of Japan's modern bridge building begins with a tragedy at sea. In 1955, a ferry sinking in the waters between 2 of Japan's main islands killed 168 people. The disaster galvanized public demand for permanent bridge connections between the islands that had relied on ferries for centuries. After decades of planning and political debate, the government approved 3 separate routes connecting 2 of the main islands, each requiring multiple bridges across a stretch of water dotted with small islands. One route, completed in the late 1980s, consists of 6 bridges spanning a total distance of 13 kilometers. The bridges carry both a 4-lane highway and a double-track railway on 2 separate decks, one of the most complex bridge systems ever built. Another route includes a series of 3 suspension bridges built one after another, creating the longest chain of suspension bridges in the world. And the 3rd route ends with the Great Bridge that survived the Kobe earthquake. Japanese bridge engineers faced challenges that builders in Europe and America rarely had to consider. Japan sits at the meeting point of 4 enormous plates of the Earth's crust, making it one of the most earthquake-prone places on the planet. Any bridge built in Japan must be designed to survive the kinds of earthquakes that would be considered extreme almost anywhere else. The Great Bridge in Kobe was designed to withstand quakes far more powerful than the one that struck during its construction, using a system of enormous pendulums housed inside the towers that swing in the opposite direction of the earthquake's movement, cancelling out the shaking. The bridge deck was designed with an open framework that lets wind pass through rather than push against it, allowing it to endure storms with winds exceeding 280 kilometers per hour. The technologies developed for Japan's bridges have been adopted worldwide. Systems that allow a bridge to move independently from its foundations during an earthquake were pioneered in Japan and are now standard practice in earthquake zones around the world. Methods for absorbing and releasing the energy of ground movement, originally designed for Japanese bridges, are now used in structures from California to Turkey to New Zealand. Japanese engineers essentially wrote the guidebook on building bridges in earthquake country, and the rest of the world has been learning from it ever since. Beyond the headline-grabbing suspension bridges, Japan has also pushed boundaries in quieter ways. The country's mountainous terrain and densely packed cities have demanded creative solutions for tight spaces, steep slopes, and complicated intersections. Japanese engineers developed bridges with asymmetric cable designs that could be built in narrow valleys, and they pioneered a style that blends the efficiency of cable-supported bridges with the solidity of concrete beams. There is also a cultural dimension to Japanese bridge building that deserves a moment of our attention. Bridges hold a special place in Japanese art and tradition. The graceful arched bridges of temple gardens, the flat wooden bridges that cross streams in traditional landscapes. These have been subjects of painting and poetry for centuries. One famous bridge, originally built in the 1600s, is a series of 5 wooden arches that has been designated a national treasure. Another, in the heart of Tokyo, originally marked the starting point of the 5 great highways of an earlier age. That bridge remains a cultural landmark, though it now sits beneath an elevated highway built directly above it in 1963, a decision so controversial that campaigns to remove the highway and restore the bridge's dignity have continued for decades. Japan's bridge engineering achievement is not simply about building the longest or the strongest bridges. It is about building bridges that can survive in one of the most geologically hostile environments on Earth, structures that must endure earthquakes, storms, and the corrosive salt air of an island nation surrounded by ocean. The bridge that stood calmly through the Kobe earthquake, its towers undamaged while the city around it crumbled, is both a tribute to Japanese engineering and a promise that bridges can be built to endure whatever nature brings. And now, let us turn from engineering to a very different kind of bridge story. One where a bridge became not a feat of construction, but a stage for one of the most important moments in the struggle for human rights. John Lewis was 25 years old on the morning of March 7, 1965, when he walked to the front of a column of roughly 600 people gathered at a church in Selma, Alabama. Lewis was carrying a small backpack containing an apple, a toothbrush, and a book, provisions for what he expected might be a night in jail. Beside him walked another leader of the civil rights movement. Together, they led the group south through the streets of Selma toward a steel arch bridge that crossed the Alabama River on the eastern edge of town. Their destination was the state capital, Montgomery, 54 miles away, where they intended to demand the right to vote. They never reached Montgomery that day. As the marchers crested the high point of the arched bridge and began the descent on the far side, they saw what was waiting for them. A wall of state police officers in blue helmets and gas masks lined across the highway in a formation that blocked the road completely. Behind the police, mounted men on horseback carried weapons that should never have been pointed at unarmed citizens. The marchers were given less than 2 minutes to turn around. Then, without waiting for an answer, the officers charged. What followed was 17 minutes of violence that would change the course of American history. Officers waded into the crowd with clubs, beating people to the ground. Gas canisters were fired into the crowd, choking men, women, and children. The mounted men charged on horseback, striking anyone within reach. John Lewis, standing his ground at the front of the line, was struck in the head, fracturing his skull. He fell, got up, was hit again, and fell again. A woman of 53, a lifelong voting rights activist, was beaten unconscious and left lying on the bridge. Television cameras captured all of it. A network interrupted its evening broadcast to show footage of law enforcement officers beating unarmed citizens on a bridge in Alabama. The images went around the world. The event became known as Bloody Sunday, and that steel bridge became the most powerful symbol of the American civil rights movement. The bridge carries a bitter irony in its name. The man it was named for was a general who had fought to preserve slavery, and after the war he became a leader of an organization dedicated to racial terror before serving as a senator. The marchers who crossed his bridge that Sunday were fighting for the very rights that the bridge's namesake had spent his life trying to deny them. The bridge, named for a man who stood for oppression, became the site of the defining moment in the struggle for equality. 2 more marches followed. On March 9th, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a symbolic march to the bridge and back, choosing not to confront the police again. The 3rd march, protected by federal troops after a court order, began on March 21st and reached Montgomery 4 days later, with the number of marchers swelling from a few hundred to 25,000 by the time they arrived at the state capitol. 5 months later, the president signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the most important pieces of legislation in American history. The law banned the discriminatory practices that had kept millions of black citizens from voting, including rigged tests, unfair taxes, and arbitrary registration procedures. The marches from Selma and the violence on that bridge were the events that broke the political deadlock and made the law possible. That bridge is not the only bridge in history to serve as a stage for political confrontation and social change. Bridges, by their nature, are narrow passages where the movement of people can be concentrated, watched, controlled, or stopped. This geographic reality has made bridges politically significant across cultures and centuries. In divided Belfast, during the decades of conflict in Northern Ireland, bridges became contested boundaries between neighborhoods, their crossings fraught with danger. In Berlin, a bridge connecting the western and eastern sides of the divided city became famous as the place where prisoners were exchanged between opposing sides during the Cold War. In South Africa, bridges became sites of confrontation between those fighting against racial injustice and the security forces defending the old order. In each case, the bridge served not merely as a crossing but as a stage, a place where the drama of political struggle was performed in full view of the world. That bridge in Selma is the most famous example, but it is part of a much larger pattern in which bridges have served as the physical settings for some of history's most important moments of resistance and transformation. John Lewis crossed that bridge for the last time in July of 2020, when his coffin was carried across on a horse-drawn carriage during his funeral procession. Lewis had served in the United States Congress for 33 years and had returned to the bridge every year on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, leading walks across the span where he had been beaten as a young man. The bridge had become inseparable from his story, and his story had become inseparable from the bridge. And now, let us travel to another bridge whose story is about destruction and rebirth, a bridge in a city whose very name means bridge keeper. On the morning of November 9, 1993, gunners in the hills above the Bosnian city of Mostar aimed their weapons at a bridge that had spanned the turquoise waters of the river below for 427 years. The bridge had already been hit multiple times during the fighting, its white stone scarred by shell fragments, its railings shattered. But on this day, the shelling was sustained and deliberate. Round after round struck the ancient arch until at 10:15 in the morning, the bridge collapsed into the river. People on both banks watched in horror as one of the most beautiful structures in southeastern Europe disappeared in a cloud of white dust and debris. This bridge was not merely a way to cross a river. For the people of Mostar, a city whose very name comes from the word for bridge keeper, it was the heart and soul of the place. Built between 1557 and 1566 on the orders of the Ottoman Sultan, the bridge was designed by an architect who had studied under the greatest builder of the age. The task was daunting. He was required to span the river in a single arch, with no support in the water, at a point where the gorge was nearly 95 feet wide. Legend says the architect was so frightened of failure and of the Sultan's punishment for failure that he arranged his own funeral before the temporary supports were removed. He need not have worried. The arch was perfect. It was a graceful curve of pale limestone, nearly 29 meters across, rising 12 meters above the summer water level. The stones were held together with iron clamps and molten lead, a technique that allowed the arch to flex slightly without cracking. The proportions were the result of careful calculation, balancing the outward push of the arch against the resistance of the supports on either side. The simplicity of the design was deceptive. Modern engineers still admire its elegance. For centuries, the bridge was the center of the city's life. Markets and shops clustered at both ends, and the bridge itself was a gathering place where people from all of the city's communities of different faiths and backgrounds met, traded, and talked. The bridge also gave rise to a tradition that continues to this day, the bridge dive. For generations, young men of Mostar have been leaping from the top of the arch into the icy river below, a drop of more than 20 meters that requires both courage and skill. The destruction of the bridge was not an act of military need. The bridge had some small value as a crossing, but its targeting was widely understood as an act of cultural destruction, an attempt to erase a symbol of the mixed community that Mostar had been before the war. An international court later concluded that the destruction of the bridge was a war crime, part of a broader campaign of ethnic violence. The loss was felt far beyond the city. International organizations, governments, and cultural foundations from many countries came together to plan the bridge's reconstruction. The decision to rebuild was itself the subject of debate. Some argued that the ruin should be left as it was, a memorial to what the war had destroyed. Others insisted that rebuilding would be an act of hope. The rebuilders won the argument. The reconstruction took nearly a decade of painstaking work. The goal was to rebuild the bridge as faithfully as possible to the original, using the same materials, techniques, and design principles that the architect had used more than 4 centuries earlier. Divers recovered original stones from the riverbed where they had fallen, and these were used in the new structure wherever possible. Where original stones could not be used, new limestone was quarried from the same area where the original stone had come from. The clamps that held the stones together were hand-forged from iron and secured with molten lead, exactly as they had been in the 16th century. The reconstruction was not purely historical. Modern engineers added hidden reinforcement within the arch for protection against future earthquakes, and the supports were strengthened with concealed concrete. The bridge was designed to look identical to the original from the outside while being stronger on the inside. It was a marriage of historical faithfulness and modern engineering wisdom. The reconstructed bridge was reopened in July of 2004 in a ceremony attended by dignitaries from around the world. Thousands of people lined the banks of the river, and when the first walkers crossed the new bridge, many wept. The diving tradition was immediately revived, with young men leaping from the parapet as crowds cheered. The following year, the bridge and the surrounding historic area were recognized as a site of World Heritage. But the reality in Mostar is more complicated than the symbolism suggests. The city remains deeply divided along the lines that the war drew. The communities that once mixed freely on the bridge now largely live on opposite sides of the river. Children attend separate schools. Political life is organized by ethnicity. The bridge has been rebuilt, but the community it once served has not fully healed. This tension between the bridge as a symbol of unity and the city as a reality of division is perhaps the most honest thing about the story. Bridges are often used as metaphors for connection and healing, and the temptation is to treat this rebuilt bridge as proof that wounds can be mended. But bridges are not magic. A stone arch across a river does not erase the memory of the shells that destroyed it. The bridge is a triumph of engineering and international cooperation, a testament to the desire to repair what has been broken. But it is also a reminder that the hardest bridges to build are not made of stone. And so, let us carry that thought with us as we move forward into the modern age of bridge design, where new forms and new materials are reshaping what a bridge can look like and what it can do. When a Spanish architect and engineer unveiled his design for a bridge in the city of Seville in 1987, it looked like nothing the bridge world had ever seen. A single tower, angled backward at 58 degrees, rose more than 460 feet into the sky, connected to the bridge deck by pairs of cables that fanned outward like the strings of a harp. There was no traditional counterweight on the far side. Instead, the weight of the tower itself, filled with concrete, served as the balance to the weight of the road. The bridge, completed in 1992, announced to the world that bridges could be works of sculpture, that engineering could produce structures of breathtaking beauty, and that a particular style of bridge, the cable-stayed bridge, had arrived as the defining form of modern bridge design. The cable-stayed bridge is not a new invention. The basic idea, a road surface held up by cables radiating from towers, was described as far back as the 17th century. But the modern version emerged from the rubble of post-war Germany, where engineers rebuilding hundreds of destroyed river crossings needed bridge designs that were economical, quick to build, and used less steel than traditional suspension bridges. The earliest modern examples appeared in the 1950s, but it was German engineering firms that developed the form most aggressively. The Great River Rhine, which had been the most fought-over waterway in Europe during the war, needed dozens of new bridges, and German builders created cable-stayed designs that could span the river's considerable width without using enormous amounts of material. The advantages of cable-stayed bridges over suspension bridges come down to cost. A suspension bridge needs two main cables, each made of thousands of individual wires, suspended from towers and anchored at enormous foundations on each shore. This is expensive and slow. A cable-stayed bridge skips the main cables entirely, running individual stay cables directly from the towers to the road deck. The towers can be smaller, the foundations simpler, and the whole thing goes up faster. For medium to long spans, cable-stayed bridges are significantly cheaper, which is why they have become the bridge of choice for most major crossings built in recent decades. The Spanish architect who designed the bridge in Seville transformed the cable-stayed bridge from an efficient engineering solution into an art form. He was born in Valencia in 1951 and had the rare distinction of being trained in both architecture and engineering, which allowed him to design bridges that were structurally sound and visually striking at the same time. His bridges share common features: white-painted steel, flowing curves, leaning towers, and cable arrangements that suggest natural forms like wings, ribs, or feathers. He went on to design bridges across the world. A footbridge in the Spanish city of Bilbao features a single leaning arch from which the deck is suspended, looking like a bird preparing to take flight. A bridge in Buenos Aires rotates on a central point to let boats pass, its tower leaning like a dancer caught mid-turn. A bridge in Jerusalem rises nearly 400 feet above the city, its cables arranged like the strings of a harp, a reference to the city's ancient musical traditions. Not everyone admires this architect's work. Several of his bridges have experienced problems, from slippery glass surfaces that cause pedestrians to fall, to costs that far exceeded initial estimates. But his influence on bridge design has been enormous. He proved that bridges could be civic landmarks, tourist attractions, and works of art, not just useful structures. Cities around the world now commission dramatic bridges designed to attract attention and investment, and the cable-stayed form is the most popular choice. One bridge in the Netherlands, designed by a different architect, has a distinctive single tower shaped like a swan's neck that helped revitalize the city's waterfront. Another in Brazil features two cable-stayed decks that cross each other in a pattern shaped like the letter X, supported by a single tower, and it has become a symbol of the city. These are bridges designed not merely to carry traffic, but to make a statement, to announce that a city is confident, modern, and worth visiting. The most sublime example of the cable-stayed form may be a viaduct in southern France, completed in 2004. Designed by a celebrated engineer and a world-famous architect working together, it carries a highway across a wide river valley at a height of more than 340 meters, making it the tallest bridge structure in the world for many years. 7 slender concrete pillars, topped by steel towers supporting the cable-stayed deck, create an impression of impossible lightness. The bridge seems to float above the valley, its deck level with the clouds that often fill the gorge below. It is not just a crossing, it is a destination in itself, with viewpoints in the surrounding hills for visitors who come solely to see the bridge. The cable-stayed revolution continues to accelerate. New materials, including carbon fiber cables and advanced concrete, are pushing the form to new extremes. The longest cable-stayed span in the world, in the Russian city of Vladivostok, stretches more than 1,100 meters. New designs that combine cable-stayed and suspension principles are expanding what is possible. The cable-stayed bridge has become the signature bridge form of our century, a form that proves, as that Spanish architect argued throughout his career, that engineering and emotion are not opposites but partners. And no country has embraced this building revolution more enthusiastically than China. On a winter morning in the mountains of southwestern China, a truck rolls onto the deck of a bridge, and the driver, if he happens to glance over the railing, sees nothing but air for the next 565 meters straight down. This bridge, which opened in late 2016, spans a gorge so deep that if you place the Eiffel Tower at the bottom, it would not reach halfway to the road. For a time, it was the highest bridge in the world. Then China built a higher one. The newer bridge, also in the same mountainous province, surpassed it with a deck height of more than 600 meters above the river below. If you dropped a stone from the deck, it would take roughly 11 seconds to reach the water. This bridge is not a tourist attraction or a showpiece built for prestige. It is simply a highway bridge, part of a national road network connecting remote mountain communities to the economic centers of the coast. In China, building the world's highest bridge is not an exceptional event. It is simply part of the routine of national development. The scale of China's bridge building in the 21st century has no historical parallel. No civilization has ever built so many bridges so quickly. The country now has more than 1 million bridges, including more than 6,000 highway bridges longer than 1 kilometer. It holds the world records for the highest bridge, the longest sea crossing, and numerous other distinctions that seem to multiply with each passing year. This is not primarily a matter of national pride, though there is certainly that. It is the consequence of China's geography. The western two-thirds of the country is dominated by mountains, gorges, plateaus, and deserts that create formidable barriers to travel. The mountainous province where many of these record-breaking bridges are located is more than 90% steep terrain, with a landscape so rugged that historically it could take days to travel between towns only a few kilometers apart in a straight line. Building modern roads through this terrain requires bridges at a frequency that is simply unmatched anywhere else. The longest bridge in the world on the high-speed rail line between Beijing and Shanghai is a different kind of project entirely. At more than 164 kilometers in length, it carries trains across the flat, waterlogged lowlands of the Great River Delta, crossing rice paddies, canals, rivers, and lakes. The bridge was built not because the terrain was impassable, but because building an elevated track was more practical than trying to acquire the land at ground level in one of the most densely populated places on Earth. 10,000 workers built it over 4 years. It opened in 2011 and reduced the travel time between the two great cities from 18 hours to under 5. The longest sea crossing in the world, completed in 2018, is a bridge tunnel system connecting 3 cities across a wide river mouth in southern China. The project stretches 55 kilometers and includes multiple bridges, an underwater tunnel, and 4 artificial islands. It was designed to withstand powerful earthquakes, extreme storms, and the impact of a massive cargo vessel. Its purpose is economic, to link the cities of a single region into one economic zone of roughly 70 million people. China's bridge building has not been without criticism. Environmental concerns have been raised about the impact on fragile mountain ecosystems and river habitats. Working conditions on remote mountain construction sites have drawn questions, and the sheer speed of building has led some to wonder about long-term durability, since bridges built under intense time pressure may not last as long as those built more carefully. There are also questions about whether the investment is sustainable. Many bridges in remote areas carry relatively little traffic, and the toll revenue may never pay back the construction cost. Some observers argue that the most spectacular bridges are prestige projects rather than genuine transport solutions. Others respond that these bridges are investments in the future, connecting isolated communities to opportunity that would otherwise never reach them. What is beyond dispute is the engineering achievement. Chinese bridge engineers have developed methods for building in terrain that was previously considered unbuildable. Deep gorges, unstable mountain slopes, earthquake zones, open ocean. They have pioneered new materials and computer-aided design methods that allow bridges to be built with extraordinary precision. One suspension bridge, spanning a gorge nearly 500 meters deep, required its first cable to be carried across the void by a rocket because there was no other way to get it from one side to the other. The center of gravity of world bridge building has shifted eastward. For 2 centuries, the great bridges were European and American: the Iron Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Golden Gate. In our century, the great bridges are being built in China. Records that took decades to establish in the West are being broken every few years, and the pace shows no sign of slowing. The country that built the oldest standing stone arch bridge in the world, 1400 years ago, is once again building bridges that the rest of the world can only marvel at. And now, let us step away from engineering for a moment and consider bridges through a different lens, the lens of art, of literature, and of film. In the spring of 1899, the painter Claude Monet carried his easel to the edge of his water garden at Giverny and began to paint the small arched bridge that crossed the pond at its center. He painted it 12 times that year, 12 canvases from the same spot, each one catching a different quality of light: morning mist, afternoon glare, the violet shadows of dusk. The bridge was a simple wooden structure, painted green in the Japanese style, arching over a pond of water lilies. But in Monet's hands, it became something more: a frame for the play of light on water, a still point in the endlessly moving surface of the pond, and one of the most recognized images in the history of art. Monet was not the first painter to find bridges worth painting, nor would he be the last. But his devotion to that small garden bridge tells us something true about bridges and art. Bridges are among the few human structures that exist in direct conversation with the landscape around them. They span the gap between one world and another, creating visual compositions that combine the clean lines of engineering with the wild shapes of water, sky, and earth. Painters, writers, filmmakers, and poets have been drawn to bridges for as long as bridges have existed, finding in them rich symbols of connection, separation, transition, and the delicate balance of human life. Monet had been inspired by the Japanese master Hiroshige, whose woodblock prints he collected and admired. Hiroshige had spent his career painting the bridges, roads, and landscapes of Japan, and his compositions, with their bold angles, dramatic weather, and striking use of empty space, deeply influenced the painters of Europe. His bridge paintings showed bridges not as engineering objects but as stages for human experience: pedestrians caught in sudden rain, travelers crossing at twilight, fishermen casting lines from the railings. Another painter, Vincent van Gogh, was so moved by Hiroshige that he painted his own version of one of the Japanese bridge prints, translating it into his own vivid brushstrokes. Van Gogh also painted a small drawbridge in the French countryside multiple times, drawn to its simple shape and the way it framed the warm landscape of Provence. In London and Venice, the American painter James Whistler painted bridges as ghostly shapes in fog and moonlight, turning industrial structures into dreamlike compositions. In the 20th century, bridges continued to inspire artists. One painter depicted the Brooklyn Bridge as a cathedral of modernity, with soaring lines and geometric patterns that celebrated the energy and ambition of the new age. Another painted the George Washington Bridge as a stark shape against the New York sky, finding beauty in the simplest outlines of steel and cable. In literature, bridges have provided some of the most powerful settings and symbols in world writing. A novel published in 1927 opens with the collapse of a rope bridge in Peru, killing 5 travelers. A monk who witnesses the disaster decides to investigate the lives of the 5 victims, searching for whether their deaths were guided by a higher purpose or were simply meaningless chance. The book won one of America's most important literary prizes and has been read by millions. Its central question, why do certain people die at certain moments, still as haunting as the day it was written. A long poem published in 1930 used the Brooklyn Bridge as a symbol for all of American civilization, a structure connecting the nation's past and future, its material reality, and its spiritual dreams. The poet wrote much of it while living in a room overlooking the bridge, and his verses tried to give the steel and stone the mythic weight of a temple. In the literature of war, bridges hold a special place. One of the most devastating short stories ever written about the experience of war, barely 2 pages long, describes a brief conversation with an old man sitting beside a temporary bridge during the Spanish Civil War. The old man, too tired to walk any further, tells the narrator about the animals he left behind when he fled his town. The story uses the bridge, the crossing point between safety and danger, between the old world and the one being born, as its central image, and it achieves a power far beyond its tiny length. In cinema, bridges have provided unforgettable dramatic settings. A film released in 1957 about the construction of a bridge on a wartime jungle railway won 7 of the highest awards in the film industry and became one of the most celebrated war films ever made. The bridge serves as a symbol of the tangled relationship between captor and captive, between the drive to create and the impulse to destroy. The film's final scene, in which the bridge is destroyed at the very moment it is completed, remains one of the most memorable in all of cinema. Bridges have also served as settings for romance and suspense. In Paris, a pedestrian bridge was for years covered with padlocks placed by couples as tokens of their love, so many that the weight of the locks threatened the bridge itself, and the railings eventually had to be replaced. In the films of one of cinema's great masters of suspense, bridges appear as locations of danger and exposure, their height and openness creating natural settings for moments of tension. And a more recent film dramatized the Cold War prisoner exchanges that took place on a bridge in divided Berlin, using the bridge as a space between 2 worlds, 2 ways of life, 2 competing visions of the future. The bridge endures as a subject for art because it is one of the few human structures that is inherently dramatic. A building sits on the ground, a road follows the terrain, but a bridge leaps across a void that nature has placed in the path of human movement. This act of defiance, this spanning of what seems unspannable, has made bridges symbols of ambition, connection, and vulnerability for as long as people have picked up a brush or a pen. And now, let us return from the world of imagination to a far less romantic reality, the slow and quiet crisis of bridges that are crumbling beneath our feet. At 6:05 in the evening on the 1st of August 2007, during the busiest part of the evening commute, a highway bridge in the city of Minneapolis dropped straight into the river. The 8-lane steel bridge, which carried more than 140,000 vehicles every day, fell without any warning. More than 100 vehicles were on the bridge at the moment of collapse. 13 people were killed and 145 were injured. A school bus carrying 60 children was on the bridge when it fell. The bus came to rest on the collapsed deck, tilted at a steep angle, but it did not tumble into the water. All the children survived, thanks in part to the quick actions of a young staff member who kicked open the back door and carried them to safety. This bridge had been classified as in poor condition since 1990. The designation did not mean it was about to fall, but it meant that parts of the structure had weakened enough to need close watching and eventual repair. At the time of the collapse, roughly 75,000 bridges across the country carried the same warning. The bridge had been inspected every year, and every inspection had noted the same problems: rust, cracking, and weakening of the steel. But the bridge stayed open, because replacing it would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars that no one was prepared to spend. The investigation found that the collapse was caused by a design error that had been present since the bridge was first built in 1967. The steel plates that connected the bridge's main structural members at a critical joint were roughly half the thickness they should have been. This flaw had gone unnoticed for 40 years. On the day of the collapse, the added weight of construction materials piled on the bridge deck for a resurfacing project, combined with normal traffic, exceeded the capacity of those weakened plates. They buckled and the bridge came down. The disaster was a warning, but it was not the first. Engineers had been raising alarms about the state of the country's infrastructure for more than a decade. Regular assessments consistently gave American bridges poor grades, noting massive shortfalls in maintenance and repair. The numbers were sobering: more than 600,000 bridges in the country, with roughly 1 in 12 classified as being in poor condition. The estimated cost of addressing all the problems exceeded $125 billion. The problem was not limited to America. 11 years later, on an August afternoon in the Italian city of Genoa, a 200-meter section of a major highway bridge collapsed during a rainstorm, killing 43 people. This bridge, opened in the same year as the Minneapolis Bridge, 1967, had a distinctive design using cables encased in concrete. The concrete was meant to protect the steel cables from rust, but instead it trapped moisture against the metal, speeding up the very damage it was supposed to prevent. The bridge had shown signs of trouble for decades, and Italian engineers had debated its safety for years. But the bridge carried 65,000 vehicles a day and was the main route connecting the city to its highways. Closing it would have caused enormous economic disruption. The Genoa collapse sent shockwaves across Europe. Emergency inspections revealed that hundreds of highway bridges in Germany, France, and other countries were in urgent need of repair. In Germany, many bridges on the highway system were found to be in critical condition. In France, a government review found that a third of the country's bridges needed work, with a significant number posing genuine structural risk. The pattern was the same everywhere. Bridges built during the great construction boom of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s were reaching the end of their intended working lives, and the cost of maintaining and replacing them was overwhelming the budgets of the governments responsible for them. The root cause of this crisis is, at its heart, a matter of politics. Building a new bridge is visible and dramatic, with opportunities for celebrations and speeches. Maintaining an existing bridge is invisible and unglamorous, with no political reward at all. The result across democratic countries worldwide is a deep bias toward building new things and against taking care of old ones. The backlog of neglect compounds year after year, the bridges aging quietly while the money goes elsewhere. In America, a major infrastructure law in 2021 set aside $40 billion specifically for bridge repair and replacement, the largest investment of its kind in the country's history. But the scale of the problem is far larger than even this commitment. At the current rate, it will take decades to catch up with the backlog. Meanwhile, the bridges continue to age, Traffic continues to grow, and the changing climate is adding new stresses, more extreme temperatures, heavier flooding, more powerful storms that speed up the decay. The replacement of the collapsed bridge in Genoa offers a glimpse of what can be achieved when the will exists. A celebrated Italian architect designed a new bridge that was built in under 2 years. The replacement features a modern monitoring system that continuously tracks the bridge's health, ensuring that the kind of slow, hidden damage that destroyed the old bridge could never happen again. But for every bridge that collapses dramatically enough to command attention, there are hundreds that simply deteriorate, slowly and silently, until one day a truck crosses and finds that the concrete has crumbled, the steel has rusted, and the structure can carry no more. The lesson is simple and uncomfortable. Bridges are not permanent. They age, they weaken, and they require constant care. Building a bridge is only the beginning of a promise that lasts as long as the bridge stands. And now, let us turn to a very different kind of bridge, one built not for cars or people or trains, but for animals. Every November on a remote Australian island in the Indian Ocean, something extraordinary happens. Roughly 100 million small red crabs, bright scarlet creatures with bodies about the size of a human hand, emerge from the rainforest and begin walking toward the sea. They walk in rivers of red, covering roads, lawns, and parking lots in a living carpet. They must reach the ocean to breed, and nothing stops them. For decades, the annual migration was a disaster for both crabs and drivers. Crabs were crushed by the thousands beneath tires, and their tough shells punctured so many tires that the island's rubber supply was under constant strain. Then someone built a bridge. Not a bridge for people, but a bridge for crabs. On one of the island's busiest roads, a small overpass was built specifically to carry red crabs safely over the traffic below. Alongside the bridge, miles of low barriers were installed to guide the crabs away from the road and through dozens of underpasses. The system has dramatically reduced the number of crabs killed and tires punctured, while allowing the island's human residents to go about their lives during the migration. The crab bridge has become a small tourist attraction in its own right, drawing visitors who come to watch the tide of scarlet crabs flowing across the overpass above the traffic. This crab bridge is a charming example of a serious and growing development in bridge engineering, the construction of crossings designed not for human use, but for the movement of animals across landscapes that human roads and railways have cut in two. The idea of wildlife crossings, bridges, tunnels, and other structures that allow animals to safely cross our roads has grown from a small experiment into a worldwide conservation movement. The most extensive and best-studied wildlife crossing system in the world is in a national park in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. A major highway cuts through the heart of the park, a road that, before anything was done, was killing thousands of animals every year. Beginning in the 1990s, the park's managers built dozens of crossing structures along the highway within the park, including enormous overpasses that look like natural ridges covered in soil and native plants, wide enough for the largest animals to cross comfortably. The results have been remarkable. Fencing along the highway directs animals toward the crossings, and collisions between vehicles and wildlife have dropped by more than 80%. For some species, the reduction is even greater. Since monitoring began, 11 species of large mammals have been recorded using the crossings more than 150,000 times, including bears, wolves, mountain lions, moose, elk, deer, and bighorn sheep. Research has shown that the crossings are keeping animal populations genetically healthy by allowing individuals to move between areas that would otherwise be completely cut off from each other. One of the most important discoveries from this research is that different animals prefer different kinds of crossings. Bears, wolves, and elk prefer the wide, open overpasses that offer clear views and feel like natural terrain. Mountain lions and black bears prefer the narrower, more enclosed underpasses that provide cover and concealment. This finding has shaped the design of wildlife crossings around the world, encouraging engineers to build a variety of types to suit different species. The movement has spread far beyond Canada. In the Netherlands, which has one of the most crowded road networks in Europe, more than 600 wildlife crossings have been built, including enormous green bridges covered in soil, trees, and shrubs that allow deer, wild boar, and badgers to cross highways that would otherwise be impassable barriers. One of these green bridges is 800 meters long and 50 meters wide, connecting two nature reserves across a highway, a railway, and a sports complex. In the United States, a major wildlife crossing began construction over one of the busiest highways in Los Angeles in recent years. The structure is designed to help mountain lions and other animals move between mountain ranges that the highway has separated, and it is the largest urban wildlife crossing ever attempted. The science behind these crossings has become increasingly refined. Researchers use cameras, tracking devices, and genetic analysis to study how animals use the crossings and how effective they are. The data consistently shows that wildlife crossings work. They reduce animal deaths on roads, they maintain the genetic connections between populations, and they allow animals to reach food, water, and mates on both sides of the barriers that human roads have created. The concept has expanded beyond land animals. In Australia, rope bridges have been strung across highways to allow tree-dwelling animals like possums to cross safely. In the Pacific Northwest, structures have been built to help salmon bypass dams and other obstacles during their annual migration. In Kenya, underpasses have been built beneath railway lines so that elephant herds can continue to follow their traditional routes. The idea that a bridge might be built not for human convenience but for the welfare of other creatures would have seemed strange to the builders of earlier centuries. But it reflects a quiet shift in how we think about our place in the natural world. For most of history, bridges were tools of human dominion, structures that let us cross barriers that nature placed in our path. Wildlife crossings turn that logic around. They are structures that let nature cross barriers that we have placed in its path. It is a small gesture, and it does not come close to undoing the damage that roads have done to the natural world. But it is a beginning, and it suggests that the ancient art of bridge building may find some of its most important future work in reconnecting a world that human activity has broken apart. And speaking of walking, let us turn now to a kind of bridge that is as old as the idea of crossing itself and as new as the latest glass-bottomed sensation, the pedestrian bridge. On a Saturday morning in June of the year 2000, roughly 90,000 people set out to walk across London's newest landmark, a sleek footbridge connecting the art gallery on the south bank of the Thames to the cathedral on the north bank. The bridge was a minimalist masterpiece, 320 meters of steel and cable so subtly supported that it seemed to float above the river without any visible means of holding itself up. It was the first new crossing of the Thames in central London in over 100 years, and within minutes of opening, it began to sway. The swaying started gently, a small side-to-side movement that most people blamed on the crowd. But as more walkers stepped onto the bridge, the movement grew. The bridge began to roll from side to side like a ship in a gentle sea. People, instinctively trying to keep their balance, began to walk in time with the swaying, which only made it worse, creating a feedback loop in which the bridge's movement synchronized the crowd's footsteps, and the synchronized footsteps amplified the bridge's movement. By the end of the weekend, the swaying had become pronounced enough to close the bridge for safety. The bridge remained closed for nearly 2 years while engineers fitted dozens of special devices beneath the deck to absorb the side-to-side forces. The modifications were expensive, but when the bridge reopened, the problem was gone. The bridge has performed perfectly since, but the nickname stuck. Londoners still call it the Wobbly Bridge, and the engineering lesson of its opening day has influenced the design of pedestrian bridges around the world. The wobble was embarrassing, but it also highlighted the unique challenges of building bridges for people on foot. Vehicle bridges must resist the weight and speed of heavy traffic. Pedestrian bridges face a very different set of forces: the rhythmic impact of footsteps, the tendency of crowds to fall into step with each other, and the fact that walkers, unlike drivers sealed inside cars, can feel every vibration and tremor. A highway bridge that wobbled as much as the London Bridge did on its opening day would be perfectly safe and probably unnoticeable. For people walking on an open deck above a river, the same movement felt alarming. Pedestrian bridges have existed for as long as bridges of any kind. The earliest crossings, those fallen logs and stepping stones of deep prehistory, were pedestrian bridges by default. But the modern concept of the pedestrian bridge as an architectural showpiece, a tourist draw, and a piece of urban design is something quite recent. It grew out of the late 20th century as cities around the world began to reclaim their waterfronts and invest in making their streets more welcoming to walkers. Perhaps the most famous example is an elevated walkway in New York City, built on the remains of an old freight railway line that had been abandoned for decades. The railway runs along the west side of Manhattan, and for years it stood unused, its tracks slowly disappearing under wildflowers and young trees. Rather than tear it down, the city transformed it into a public garden, a ribbon of green winding through the neighborhoods below. It is not a bridge in the traditional sense. It does not cross a river, but it works as an elevated pedestrian crossing that connects neighborhoods, provides greenery, and has changed the character of the surrounding area. It attracted millions of visitors in its first year and has inspired similar projects in cities around the world. In China, pedestrian bridges have been taken to heights that test the nerves of even the bravest visitors. In one mountainous province, a glass-bottomed bridge spans a gorge more than 400 meters long and 300 meters above the valley floor. Walking across means looking straight down through transparent panels at a drop of nearly 1,000 feet. The bridge has attracted millions of visitors, many of whom have been filmed crawling on hands and knees or clinging to the railings. It also features a platform for jumping. At more than 260 meters, the highest such leap available anywhere in the world. This glass bridge launched an entire trend, with dozens of similar structures appearing across the country within a few years. These glass bridges illustrate something important about modern pedestrian crossings. They are often built not primarily for getting somewhere, but for the experience of crossing them. Unlike vehicle bridges, which succeed by being as unremarkable as possible, pedestrian bridges succeed by being memorable. The best ones create moments: the thrill of a glass floor, the gentle sway of a suspended walkway, the surprise of finding a garden above a city street. This experiential quality has made pedestrian bridges attractive to architects, who see them as opportunities for expression unconstrained by the demands of heavy traffic. Pedestrian bridges are lighter, more forgiving of experiment, and more open to unusual shapes and materials. The result has been a flowering of creative designs: bridges that curl into circles, bridges that spiral like strands of twisted rope, bridges that look like wings or sails or waves. Not all pedestrian bridges are grand or dramatic. In many parts of the developing world, simple footbridges serve a far more urgent purpose, connecting communities separated by rivers or ravines that are impassable during the rainy season. Non-profit organizations have built hundreds of footbridges in rural areas of Africa, Asia, and South America, providing access to schools, markets, and medical care that would otherwise be out of reach for months at a time. Studies have found that communities connected by these simple bridges see real improvements in school attendance, market access, and family income. The pedestrian bridge in all its forms, from the glass-floored spectacle to the cable footbridge in a remote village, represents the bridge at its most essential. It carries only people. It does not need to hold trucks or trains. It needs only to carry a human being from one side to the other, safely, and, if we are fortunate, beautifully. And behind every bridge, grand or simple, stand the people who built it. Let us turn now to their story. In 1886, a company building a railway bridge across the Great River near the Mohawk community south of Montreal hired local men as day laborers, expecting them to carry materials and perform basic tasks. What the company discovered astonished them. The Mohawk workers showed not only a complete lack of fear at height, but a keen interest in the skilled work being done high above the water. Without being asked, they began walking along narrow steel beams, balancing with a casual ease that left the European-trained workers staring in disbelief. The company, recognizing this natural gift, began training them as structural ironworkers. Within a few years, Mohawk ironworkers were in demand on steel construction projects across northeastern North America, and a tradition was born that would span more than a century. These workers, known as skywalkers for their ability to walk the high steel, became one of the most distinctive labor forces in the history of construction. The list of structures they helped build reads like a catalogue of the most famous buildings and bridges of the 20th century. The Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the George Washington Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, the towers of the World Trade Center, all of them bear the mark of Mohawk hands. In the 1920s, so many families had moved from the community near Montreal to New York City for ironworking jobs that an entire neighborhood formed in Brooklyn, known informally by a version of the community's original name. The men commuted to construction sites across the city, speaking their own language on the job, eating together during breaks, and maintaining their connection to their homeland hundreds of miles to the north. The tradition was forged in tragedy. In 1907, the partially completed arm of a great bridge being built across the same river collapsed, killing 75 workers. 33 of the dead were Mohawk men from the same community. The disaster was devastating. In its aftermath, the community made a collective decision that would shape its future. Never again would so many of their men work on a single project. From that point forward, Mohawk ironworkers spread themselves across multiple job sites, ensuring that no single disaster could inflict such a terrible loss again. This practice of dispersal is part of what sent Mohawk workers to projects across the continent and helped build their reputation as the most widely traveled ironworkers in America. The Mohawk tradition is the most celebrated chapter in the labor history of bridge building, but it is only one chapter. The people who build bridges have always been drawn from the most physically daring, the most economically pressed, or the most culturally specialized parts of the workforce. They have worked in conditions of extreme danger, often for modest pay, and the bridges they built are monuments not only to engineering cleverness, but to human endurance. In New York, another group of workers developed their own proud tradition. The men who dug the foundations for bridges and tunnels beneath the rivers and harbors were known by a nickname that stuck, a reference to the sandy earth they dug through. These workers descended into enormous sealed boxes sunk to the bottom of the river, working in air pumped to high pressure, digging through mud and rock in near-total darkness. The conditions were nightmarish. The air was thick and stale, fire was a constant danger, and a mysterious sickness struck without warning. This sickness, caused by tiny bubbles forming in the bloodstream when workers returned too quickly to normal air pressure, produced symptoms ranging from agonizing joint pain to paralysis and death. The chief engineer of the Brooklyn Bridge was permanently disabled by it. The workers, mostly immigrants from Ireland and Germany, had no understanding of the cause and no protection when it came. They were paid daily wages and could be replaced without notice. The work was so dangerous and so unpleasant that these foundation workers became known as the toughest, or perhaps the most desperate laborers in the city. On the Golden Gate Bridge, the chief engineer insisted on safety measures that were revolutionary for the 1930s. He required hard hats, special goggles, and a safety net beneath the bridge deck. The net saved 19 men who fell, and they formed an informal club named for the terrifying sensation of falling before the net caught them. But the net could not save everyone. 10 men died in a single accident when a scaffold tore through the mesh. On the bridge being built across the bay at the same time, 28 workers died, more than twice the number lost on the Golden Gate. The difference in death tolls was largely due to the difference in safety investment. The choice to spend money on protection or not to spend it was often a business decision rather than a moral one. Around the world, the labor history of bridge construction follows a consistent pattern. The most dangerous work is done by the most vulnerable workers. In colonial India, bridges were built by laborers under conditions that were rarely recorded. On the wartime jungle railway, prisoners and forced laborers built bridges at gunpoint, dying in tens of thousands. In the American South, men imprisoned under unjust laws were forced to build bridges and roads for no pay. Even today, bridge building remains one of the most dangerous occupations in the world. Workers face the risk of falling, equipment failure, and the slow physical toll of heavy labor in extreme conditions, high winds, intense heat or cold, and the constant vibration of heavy machinery. Safety has improved enormously since the 19th century, but the fundamental reality remains. Every bridge is built by human hands, and the people who do the work accept risks that most of us would find unthinkable. The bridges themselves are the memorials. Every rivet, every cable, every stone was placed by a person working at the limits of endurance and courage. The names of these workers are mostly lost to history. We remember the engineers and the architects, but the laborers who actually built the bridges are anonymous. They deserve to be remembered because the history of bridges is not only a history of design, it is a history of sweat and sacrifice and of the extraordinary human willingness to risk everything to build something that will outlast the builders. And so with these workers in our thoughts, let us look forward one last time to the bridges of tomorrow. In the summer of 2021, people crossing a canal in the center of Amsterdam walked for the first time across a bridge that had been printed by robots. A Dutch technology company had used robotic arms that deposited molten steel in layers to build a 12-meter-long bridge of stainless steel, weighing 4.5 tons. But the bridge was more than just a curiosity. Hidden throughout the structure were tiny sensors that continuously measured strain, vibration, temperature, and even the behavior of the people crossing it. These sensors sent their readings to a computer model, a kind of digital twin that mirrored the physical bridge in real time, allowing engineers to watch the bridge's health, predict when it might need attention, and study how it performed under actual conditions rather than theoretical ones. This small canal bridge represents a coming together of technologies, robotic manufacturing, sensor networks, computer modeling, and artificial intelligence that may change how bridges are designed, built, and cared for in the decades ahead. The bridge of the future may not be a still, silent structure that is built once and then checked from time to time by an engineer with a clipboard. It may be a living system that watches itself, reports its own condition, predicts its own problems, and adjusts its behavior as conditions change. Smart bridge technology is already being used on a growing number of major structures around the world. Thin glass fibers embedded in bridge decks and cables can detect tiny changes in strain and temperature, giving early warning of problems long before they become visible to the eye. Satellite positioning systems track the movement of towers and decks to within fractions of an inch. Vibration sensors and computer programs analyze patterns to identify changes that might signal developing trouble. The replacement bridge in Genoa, designed by the Italian architect after the terrible collapse there, is one of the most closely watched bridges in the world, equipped with hundreds of sensors that track its health around the clock. The potential of printed bridges extends far beyond small canal crossings. Researchers at universities around the world are developing ways to print bridges from concrete, from composite materials, and from combinations of printed and traditional elements. The advantages are real. Printing can produce complex shapes that would be very difficult to build the traditional way. It wastes less material because it places material only where it is needed, and it can speed construction dramatically by removing the need for temporary molds and forms. New materials are contributing their own quiet revolution. Scientists have developed concrete that can repair its own cracks, using tiny capsules of material that activate when damage occurs. Special metal alloys that can return to their original shape after being bent are being studied for use in bridge parts that must resist earthquake forces. New kinds of concrete, 5 to 10 times stronger than the ordinary kind, allow thinner, lighter structures that use less material while carrying more weight. And cables made from carbon fiber, lighter and more resistant to rust than steel, are being used in an increasing number of projects. Among the most ambitious bridge proposals in the world is a crossing that would connect the island of Sicily to the mainland of Italy, spanning one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the Mediterranean. The bridge has been proposed, debated, approved, and cancelled repeatedly since the 1860s. If it is ever built, its central span would be more than 3,300 meters, nearly double the span of the current world record holder, and nearly a kilometer longer than any suspension bridge ever constructed. The engineering challenges are enormous. The strait is earthquake-prone, the currents are powerful, and the wind conditions are severe. In Norway, engineers are planning floating bridges and submerged tunnels to cross the deep coastal waterways called fjords along the country's western coast. One proposed crossing would use a floating bridge more than 5 kilometers long, anchored to the seabed by cables, to cross a fjord that is simply too deep for any ordinary bridge foundation to reach. The future of bridges may include structures that barely look like bridges at all. Proposals for high-speed transit systems envision tube-like structures raised above the ground on slender supports, carrying passengers at speeds of 600 miles per hour or more. Bridge surfaces embedded with solar panels could generate electricity while carrying traffic. And living bridges, inspired by the root bridges of Meghalaya that we explored earlier in our story, are being studied by engineers curious about the possibility of growing structural elements from living plants rather than manufacturing them from steel and concrete. And so, here we are, at the end of our long journey through the history of bridges. We have traveled from a fallen tree across a prehistoric stream to a bridge printed by robots in the heart of Amsterdam. We have crossed the Euphrates with the ancient Babylonians and the Rhine with Caesar's legions. We have walked the living root bridges of the Indian cloud forests and the woven grass bridges of the Andes. We have stood beneath the massive arches of Roman aqueducts and felt the sway of iron chain bridges in the gorges of China. We have watched medieval pilgrims pray in chapels built on bridge piers and listened to music drifting through the arches of Persian bridges at sunset. We have felt the terror of soldiers fighting for a crossing at Remagen and the courage of marchers walking into violence on a bridge in Selma. We have mourned the bridges that have fallen, from the storm-swept waters of Scotland to the crumbling highways of the modern world, and celebrated the ones that have been rebuilt, stone by careful stone, from the rubble of war. We have met the people who built these bridges, the skywalkers of the Mohawk Nation, the sandhogs of New York, the nameless laborers who risked their lives for modest wages so that the rest of us could cross safely from one side to the other. And we have looked forward to a future of bridges that can feel and think and heal themselves, bridges that carry not only people but animals, bridges that are printed by machines and grown from living roots. Through all of it, one thing has remained constant: the impulse to bridge the gap, to connect what is separated, to build a path across the void. It is one of the oldest and most deeply human instincts we possess. Every bridge ever built, from the simplest log across a stream to the longest suspension span on Earth, is an expression of the same quiet refusal to accept that any gap is too wide, any gorge too deep, any river too strong to cross. The next time you cross a bridge, any bridge at all, even a small one over a drainage ditch or a highway overpass you drive without thinking, consider for a moment the long chain of builders and dreamers and workers whose efforts brought you to that crossing. Consider the fallen tree that started it all, and the nameless ancestor who stepped onto it and walked across, and the world that opened up on the other side. And now, as this story comes to its close, let your eyes grow heavy if they wish. Let the bridges of history fade gently into the quiet of your thoughts. You have traveled a long way tonight, across centuries and continents, and the crossing is complete. Rest now and sleep well, knowing that the bridges of the world are holding, carrying us all safely from one shore to the next. Good night, and thank you for listening.